of the Metropolitan Council. We are a quorum of the committee. Committee members, we have an agenda before us. I would seek a motion for approval.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next item is approval of the minutes of the September 3rd, 2019 regular meeting of the Community Development Committee. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Second. Thank you. Any discussion, additions, corrections? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We'll move into the business items. We have items 1 through 12. Committee members, I will give you the heads up. I know that Chair Slawick would very much like to be here for item 12, the Public Housing Agency Plan approval. I believe she plans on being here at 5 o'clock. She has a 6 o'clock obligation. So if she does come at 5 o'clock, we may move that item up just so she can be here as a courtesy to the chair. If there's no objections. Great. We will move into our business items. A number of comprehensive plans before us today. The first business item is 2019-251 JT. It's the City of Tonka Bay 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Mr. Riley will present. Welcome, Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. This afternoon you have first before you the City of Tonka Bay's comprehensive plan. And I do want to let you know that that no one is here from the City of Tonka Bay.
We appreciate their work.
But we did, yes, we very much appreciate the work that the city and their consultants did on the plan. So today we'll talk first about their regional systems. Location of regional system components within the City of Tonka Bay is primarily the Lake Independence Regional Trail extension and search corridor. It bisects the city from north to south, as shown on your map. The community designation for the City of Tonka Bay is suburban. It's located in south central Hennepin County and on Lake Minnetonka, and is surrounded by the communities of Minnetonka Beach, Orono, Excelsior, and Shorewood. Forecasted growth here on Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 90 people representing 40 households and an increase of 60 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Table 2 from the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the suburban areas of the city, where the overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 5.12 and 12 units per acre. Communities with a suburban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at overall average densities of at least 5 units per acre. And Tonka Bay's plan is consistent with this policy. Like many of the communities you've heard from me from before, the existing land use, which is shown here and on Figure 3 in your staff report, is primarily residential. This City of Tonka Bay has a total of nearly 611 acres in the city, and the dominant land uses are residential at more than 45%, and lots of open water and wetlands. The 2040 planned land use, which references Figure 4 in the staff report, is also expected to stay primarily residential. So the proposed findings for you today are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans, is consistent with council policies, and compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. This item will be heard by the Environment Committee on Tuesday, September 24th, and back at the full council on Wednesday, October 9th. And with that, I have your proposed action, which is to authorize the City of Tonka Bay to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecast water resources, surface water management, and land use. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Mr. Riley has proposed an action to authorize the City of Tonka Bay to place the 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We'll move on to item 2 in the business agenda. It's 2019-252 JT. the City of Mound 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Mr. Riley.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. So today, I do have the city's consulting planner, Rita Trapp, in the audience if there are any questions, and I do want to thank her and the staff at the City of Mound for their great work on
Thank
this plan.
you. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
So again, Jake Riley, Sector Representative for District 3, and before you today is a review of the City of Mound's 2040 Comprehensive Plan, and here are the regional systems on the image before you, which is essentially there are just a few meters, lift stations, and interceptors associated with the wastewater system that run through the city. The community designation for the City of Mound is also suburban. It's located in southwestern Hennepin County on Lake Minnetonka and is surrounded by the communities of Orono, Spring Park, Shorewood, and Minnetrista. The forecasted growth for the City of Mound on Table 1 and also in your staff report shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecast that the city will grow by 200 people, representing approximately 400 households, and there'll be an increase of 300 jobs. Right? Yep. In the same time frame. And Mound has requested a forecast update based on estimates from 2018 that showed that the city had already exceeded the original 2020 forecast for population and employment, and those are indicated on the table in front of you by the underline. The planned residential density for the city is on Table 2, also in their staff report, and it's expected to be between 9.58 and 19.386 units per acre, with essentially all of the redevelopment in the city taking place in mixed-use areas that are a new designation, land use designation for the city. As you know, communities with a suburban designation are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth overall densities of 5 units per acre, and Mound's plan is consistent with that policy. This is my first time getting to talk about a unique feature or a feature that we really appreciate in this plan, which is Mound's graphical representation of planning for those mix of new uses, or a new mix of uses, I guess. So they have visualizations that start on sort of a section on mixed-use areas demonstrating in detail what planning for mix of uses looks like in the city overall, then by each section of the city, and how those might be sort of expressed in built form using examples both from the region and from around the country of what that might look like in the City of Mound. And a final segment, and then the final segment of that section includes photographic examples of the standards that might be applied to those various mixed-use areas. Is very well articulated and is really neat element in their plan. So I wanted to highlight that for all of you. So the existing land use map here, referencing Figure 3 in the staff report, demonstrates the primarily residential nature of the city, with more than 30% of the land area used for residential structures, which do range from multifamily to medium lot single-family homes with lots and lots of lakeshore. And there's a small section of retail and a small industrial area in the city, near the center of the city and close to the major thoroughfares, sort of signified by the dark lines and the darker portions of the land use map in red and purple for commercial and industrial. So then for 2040, it looks a little bit different, both with the mixed-use areas also located near those commercial industrial areas in the center of the city. They continue to be focused on maintaining a predominantly single-family residential character while encouraging multifamily housing, commercial services, and mixed-use areas in downtown, along major corridors, and at major nodes. And many of those commercial areas have been designated as mixed use to recognize that the characteristics of those areas are unique and can support a variety of uses, including commercial, residential, and public uses. It's intended, according to the plan, to provide flexibility so that property owners and developers have options when considering redevelopment in Mound, which is a pretty highly desirable area. There are 5 distinct areas shown in Figure 3.5 in the plan, which are the Village Center, Downtown Lakes, Eden Promenade, East Gateway, and Wilshire Tuxedo Gateway. And as I mentioned in the plan, they sort of provide a nice visual for what those might look like. So that's plan use. So the proposed findings before you today are that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, are consistent with council policies, and with the proposed changes to the forecast, and that the plan is compatible with the plans of adjacent local government units and affected jurisdictions. as the plan previous. The Environment Committee will hear this on Tuesday, September 12th, 24th, and the Metropolitan Council on Wednesday, October 9th. And as a reminder, if you do have questions, Rita Trapp is here to answer any of them. So the proposed action before you is to authorize the City of Mound to place the 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect, revise the City of Mound's forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the attached review record, and in the PowerPoint, advise the City to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management. And with that, I can take questions or...
Thank you, Mr. Riley, and thanks, Ms. Trapp, for being here and for your work on behalf of the City of Mound. Any questions on this report? Councilmember Alice Ingebretson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. It was wonderful, the level of detail and the examples of creative and multi-use building. I was curious, in the information, was there any information around affordable housing units being a part of that plan, or?
Mr. Riley.
Hang on a second. Sorry. The city has allocation of affordable housing need, which they have guided sufficient land for that, and the plan does detail how and sort of what tools would be used if such the opportunity arose. So they meet the requirements of the Planning Act and documents. They exceed by quite a bit the minimum number of units possible given the densities that they're expected. And that's in Figure 5 of your staff report. And it's at the back of my copy, so it might be at the back of yours as well.
I think it was, Chair, just wondering in the context of, it's totally okay if it's not known, this area of redevelopment or zoning highlighted, is that in that area, or is it just throughout the community?
Ms. Trapp. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's much easier for me
Ms.
to
Trapp,
answer.
thanks for being here.
Good afternoon. I'm Rita Trapp with the consulting firm. The City of Mound, given the fact that it is primarily a single-family residential neighborhood community, most of the redevelopment that's going to take place, including any of the affordable housing, will primarily be on those major corridors and will likely be within those redevelopment areas. Some redevelopment areas we looked at as being much more commercial and focused, and some, as we moved away from the center of downtown, probably would have more of a residential component. Mound traditionally is not is a support community that's supportive of affordable housing and has policies and programs to try and support its creation within the community to the best of its ability, given its size and constraints with all of the lakeshore and the lakeshore realities that happens. But that's where the affordable housing will be, is probably in those mixed-use areas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trapp. Further questions on the staff report? Any further questions? Seeing none, Mr. Riley has proposed a series of actions related to the City of Mound 2040 Comprehensive Plan, including revising the forecasts upward. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And discussion. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Riley.
you.
We will move on to our third business item for today. It's item 2019-253, JT. It's the City of Lauderdale 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Mr. Wycheck will present. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. I'm always impressed that you can pronounce my last name.
I have to write it down every time, but one of these times
It's a
I'm
tough
gonna
one.
Thank you.
As the Chair mentioned, I'm Eric Wycheck, Sector Representative for Districts 2, 9, and 10 in the Local Planning Assistance Unit in the Community Development Division here at the Council. Before you today is the review of the City of Lauderdale's 2040 Comprehensive Plan, and I know that the City Administrator for Lauderdale, Heather Butkowski, would have loved to have been here today, but she couldn't make it. And we worked quite closely with her throughout the last couple to 3 years on this plan. Went out to the city several times and met with them, and it's been a great pleasure working with them on this. This map shows the location of regional system components within the city of Lauderdale. There are no regional park system components. There's Metropolitan Highway 280, which is a trunk highway on the running along the western border of Lauderdale. There are two arterial roads in Lauderdale: Larpenteur Avenue, which runs east to west across the bottom of the city or near the midpoint of the city, and then Broadway, which is in the north, running towards Minneapolis and Roseville. There are two council wastewater interceptors that run through the city of Lauderdale. Thrive MSP 2040 has designated the city as urban. Lauderdale is located along the western border of Ramsey County. It is surrounded by the communities of Roseville, Falcon Heights, St. Paul, and Minneapolis. Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city will grow by 460 people, representing 260 households. There will be an increase of 240 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Early on in the planning process, the city had identified some redevelopment opportunities that precipitated a forecast amendment, an increase in forecast to accommodate these redevelopment possibilities that the city is planning for. You can see that on the right hand of that slide. Table 2 in the staff report shown here illustrates the planned residential density in the urban areas of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 10.08 dwelling units per acre and 26.58 units per acre. Communities with an urban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at overall average densities of at least 10 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. And Lauderdale's plan is consistent with this policy. In terms of the existing land use, map 3, or figure 3 in your staff report showcases the existing land use in the city. Nearly half of the city is made up of residential uses, and a small percentage, 0.3%, is commercial and office. And industrial areas really run on the west side of Trunk Highway 280, around 7.3%, and 6.5% of the city is parks and open space. In terms of future land use, the city has, I'll kind of go into this on the next slide, but the city has identified 3 different new land uses to accommodate what they see as new growth. One of them is a high density residential conservation area, which is in the lower or the southeast corner of the city. It's a redevelopment opportunity. There's also a mixed use north land use designation running along the north side of Larpenteur Avenue, and that's to obviously support the transit along that route. And then you also have mixed use south, which runs along the south portion of Larpenteur Avenue. I just want to show a little bit more detail on these 3 redevelopment potential areas in the city. It's a small city, but they have identified these areas. So maps 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5 in the plan identify these redevelopment potential areas. And the high density residential development is on the west side of Eustis Street, most recently used as a religious institution. Another area of potential redevelopment guided for that high-density residential conservation land use is the Breck Woods site in the southeast portion of the city. And then along with that, we have these mixed-use areas along Larpenteur Avenue. And that the total amount for redevelopment opportunities within the city comes to approximately 11.7 acres of land. Proposed findings, the plan conforms to Metropolitan System plans. It's consistent with council policies, with proposed changes in forecast, compatible with plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. The meeting schedule is highlighted here with Environment Committee on September 24th and Metropolitan Council on October 9th. The proposed action, again, goes along with what you see in the report. Authorize the City of Lauderdale to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect. Revise the city's forecasts upward as shown in Table 1, and revise the affordable housing need allocation along with those forecasts to 64 units. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wycheck. Questions on that report? Any questions? Councilmember Lindstrom.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move this forward with the three recommended actions, as Mr. Wycheck noted, and then if I may have a comment
Please.
as well, I would say that the three words that kind of stand out here that you don't see together very often are high density and conservation. And so this is a very unique and challenging parcel of land for Lauderdale because, as Mr. Wycheck noted, it's open space called Breck Woods, and it's land that's owned by Luther Seminary that's for sale. So I think Lauderdale, all of the city council, Mayor Gage, the staff, they've done an excellent job in balancing a real need, which is housing, with another real need, which is conservation of this pretty much old growth forest. And so just kudos to them, and I'm pleased to move this forward.
Councilmember Lindstrom has moved approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Wycheck, for your work and for the report. Business item 4, 2019-254, JT. It's the City of Greenfield 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan, and it's Ms. Baumann, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Freya Thaumann. I'm the sector representative for District 1, and today I'll be presenting the City of Greenfield's Comprehensive Plan. And before I begin, I'd like to introduce Rita Trapp, who's been up here. She's with the city's consulting planning staff, and would like to thank Rita and Brad Scheib, who have done a great job on the city's plan, and appreciate all their coordination.
Thank you.
The city of Greenfield is a predominantly rural community of about 3,000 people located on the western edge of Hennepin County and bordering Wright County. As shown here on the regional systems map, Highway 55 runs east-west through the southern part of the city, and the regional park system components in the city include Lake Rebecca Regional Park Reserve, Lake Sarah Regional Park, as well as the planned Crow River Regional Trail on the western border of the city. The city of Greenfield has its own local wastewater treatment plant, and the rural area of Greenfield is not within the council's long-term sewer service area. There is a small area of the city in the southeast, which has provided regional sewer through an intercommunity agreement with the city of Medina, and that agreement covers about 55 households. This figure shows the community designation map for Greenfield. Thrive has designated Greenfield in 2 community designations. As you can see here, the majority of Greenfield is in the diversified rural designation. And then there's a small part of Greenfield, more or less in the southwest, that is designated as emerging suburban edge in the light yellow color here. Greenfield surrounded by the communities of Corcoran, Medina, and Independence. And also adjacent to Greenfield in Wright County are the cities of Hanover and Rockford. And across the Crow River are Rockford and Franklin townships. Greenfield was a recipient of one of our small communities planning grants and received $10,000 to help with the city's planning efforts. It's shown here and in table 1 of your staff report. Between 2020 and 2040, the council forecasts that the city of Greenfield will grow by 850 people, representing 500 households, and that there'll be an increase of 150 jobs in the city in that same time frame. During the comprehensive planning review process, the council and city staff agreed to an upward revision of the employment forecasts. That revision is shown here, underlined for 2030 and 2040. And that revision upwards reflects new commercial uses near Highway 55 in the southwest part of the city. This table, which is table 2 in the staff report, illustrates the planned residential density in the emerging suburban edge area of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is anticipated to be between 3.8 and 9.2 units an acre. Communities with an emerging suburban edge designation are expected to plan for densities of at least 3 to 5 units an acre for new development, and so Greenfield's consistent with this policy. This figure shows the existing land uses in Greenfield. Greenfield is predominantly agricultural and rural. Those are the areas in kind of the light green and yellow here. These uses count for about 80% of Greenfield's existing land uses. In Greenfield, there's also an abundance of natural resources, including lakes and parks, and these are central to Greenfield's identity and account for about 15% of the existing land uses in Greenfield. And then, in addition to those uses, there's a limited amount of commercial, industrial, and institutional uses, as well as multifamily residential and single-family residential, and that's more or less in the southwest along Highway 55. This figure shows the future land uses. The majority of the city is designated as rural residential, and this land use designation maintains an existing pattern of rural development that was established in previously approved comprehensive planning efforts. This area has a maximum density of 1 unit per 5 acres. In the city's plan, the plan discusses the rural residential areas and discusses the council's flexible development guidelines and indicates that clustering of development is encouraged to preserve natural resources. This rural area is not part of the council's long-term sewer service area. The city's local wastewater treatment plant is located in the southwest, and that's really where the city has guided new locally sewered residential, commercial, industrial, institutional growth. And you can see that in the southwest there. The plan has a new village center land use that's been proposed as part of this plan, and that area is to create a core downtown area with a mix of different uses, including new retail and new housing. The proposed findings before you today are that the City of Greenfield's 2040 Comprehensive Plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policy with the proposed forecast change, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. As you've seen with some of the other earlier comp plans, this plan is scheduled for the September 24th Environment Committee and then is on the agenda for the October 9th Metropolitan Council meeting. So with that, the proposed action before you today is to authorize the City of Greenfield to place its 2040 Comprehensive Plan into effect, to revise the city's employment forecast upward as shown in Table 1 of the review record, and then advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management, forecasts, land use, and water supply. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions. And as mentioned, Rita Trapp is also here as well if you have any questions from the city's perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Thyman. Questions on that report? Any questions?
No, thank you,
Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What happens if the city doesn't adopt the MRCCA plan?
Ms. Thyman.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lee, could you please repeat your?
So in the proposed action, there's a clause that says advise the city to adopt the MRCCA plan within 60 days.
Mr. Chair and
Ms.
Councilmember
Thyman.
Lee, I think that might be an upcoming. That is not one of the items in
sorry.
Greenfield's proposal.
I'm looking at the next one, sorry.
Okay. You're anticipating your next report. Thank
Sorry.
you.
No
Any
worries.
further questions? Discussion on the report? Seeing none, Ms. Thyman has proposed a series of actions, including revising the city's employment forecast upward. Is there a motion for approval?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? That carries. Thank you for your work on this and for the
Thank
report, Ms. Thyman. Ms. Trapp, again, thanks for being here. Thanks for your work. Moving on to business item 5, 2019-255, JT. It's the City of Inver Grove Heights, 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. Mr. Boylan.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. So as you know, I'm the sector representative for districts 13, 14, 15, and 16. And just want the committee to know that representatives of the city, Mr. Alan Hunting, and staff from Hoysen and Kogler consulting firm are here. Should you have questions or should they want to say anything? And kind of before I begin, I want just to thank the staff specifically and the consulting staff for kind of all of their work. There's a lot of back and forth when it comes to a lot of detailed technical things that take a lot of time for us, and certainly just wanted to take a minute and express my appreciation for their work in the last 6 months or so.
Thank you.
Okay, before you today is the City of Maple Grove Heights 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Next slide. I guess I was supposed to have my apologies. The map. The map before you is clearer than the speaker in front of you. The map before you talks about it shows our regional systems. You can see Interstate 494 bisects almost the northern border, connecting Dakota County with Washington County, and certainly all points beyond the interstate highway system. North-south is Highway 52, which connects St. Paul to Rochester, and then Highway 55 is the kind of northwest to southeast heavy line that connects the city to the airport and to Minneapolis and points west in the state. In addition to that, there are three regional interceptors and 3 regional trails within the city. And the community designation is 2. There are 2 community designations. One has significance for regional sanitary sewer. I'll detail in a few minutes. They are suburban edge and rural residential. The rural residential areas are mostly the hilly areas. That's the kind of pale green. The hill areas to the south and south central portion of the city, and then along the Mississippi River. Rural residential in the staff report, there's more details, but the general summary is that generally it's large lot residential development, usually where topography makes it difficult or impossible. These areas thrive. State said shall not receive regional sanitary sewer service, and the plan is consistent. They don't plan to provide regional sanitary sewer service or ask for it for these areas. The pale yellow, the remaining portion of the city, is part of that suburban edge, and I will talk about density in a few minutes. So those are the community designations. The city is surrounded to the north by West St. Paul, South St. Paul, and then jumping over the river into Washington County, Newport, St. Paul Park, St. Great Cloud Island Township, and to the south, city of Rosemount, Egan, and then Sunfish Lake. The forecasted growth as part of the system statement the city responded to in developing all of their plans. In Table 1, as part of Table 1 of your staff report, talks that the city will grow by 9,400 people, represented 4,400 households, and there'll be an increase of 2,600 jobs in the time frame to 2040. The residential density, so this is the portion of that map I showed you that has the pale yellow. That's the emerging suburban edge. And these are all this sewered lots potential. And so what this table shows you is that the city has guided 684 acres with a overall minimum density of 4.4 to 10.4 as a maximum expected units per acre. Thrive calls for these communities to plan for between 3 and 5 units per acre. So this is not only consistent, but it's significantly above that threshold. Again, the rural residential areas don't receive regional sanitary sewer and are expected to discourage further development of these patterns, or discourage future development of any denser development. And a plan for rural developments at densities that are not greater than 1 in 10 units, 1 unit per 10 acres. Again, the city plan is consistent with this policy. Existing land use, like a lot of emerging suburban cities, shows a predominance of residential development. The pale yellow and the dark yellow are consistent with our policy areas. The pale yellow in the southern kind of central area is the non-Seward area, and the darker yellow areas kind of north of Highway 55, both sides of Highway 52 along the Mississippi River, and then all the way to the west to the border of Egan show an intense development of various residential uses. Residential is also there's commercial uses and industrial uses as well near those transportation nodes. Planned land use follows a very similar pattern. Of note is just south of Sunfish Lake. Sunfish Lake is the blank portion of the map, upper left corner, and just south of there, 494 dips down into the city. That is the northwest area. The city has done significant planning over the last 2 planning cycles for that. There are some challenging topography there, but some beautiful lots nonetheless, showing residential and some commercial growth there, including some higher density growth. But along the transportation corridors and existing development areas, showing some redevelopment intensification of residential uses. The findings within the staff report are that the plan conforms to the Metropolitan System plans. It's consistent with council policies and is compatible with the plans and of adjacent local government units in affected jurisdictions. Meeting schedule, similar to other items on the agenda today, or next week, the Environment Committee will look at this, and then the final council action will be the first meeting in October. Again, just wanted to thank the city staff and let you know that they are here. Sorry, one more piece. The action before you today is to authorize the city to put its 2040 plan into effect and to advise the city that to adopt the Mississippi River Critical Corridor Area Plan within 60 days after receiving the final DNR approval and submit a copy of the final adopted plan and evidence of adoption to the DNR, Metropolitan Council, the National Park Service within 10 days of its adoption. I'm available for questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Boylan, and thank you, Mr. Hunting, and the consultants for being here. Questions on that report, Councilmember Lee?
Thank you. This is where I asked the question. What is there a chance that the city might not adopt MERCA, or what happens if they don't?
Chair Ligren,
Mr. Boylan.
Councilmember Lee, I'll let Lisa add it to this if she likes. My experience is that this is really not a controversial thing. That is our experience so far is that cities are willing to do this.
Director Barajas.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just add to that, due to the nature of Minnesota or Mississippi River Critical Area rules and rulemaking process, in order for a city to update and adopt its ordinances, it needs to take the appropriate steps to get there. So this planning piece being first, and then their ordinances must follow that. So certainly the agency, if they sent ordinances to the DNR, in practicality, DNR would say, what about your plan? So like Patrick said, we haven't seen this as being an issue, but just as a reminder that this action precipitates future actions for them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions or discussion on the report?
Thanks, Madam.
Councilmember Mousse.
Mr. Chair, can you tell us more about the state of the affordable housing in Everett?
Mr. Boylan.
Yep. Wondering if specifically is your question around
General, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Affordable housing, plans for the city. What is there? Do they have any plans to increase that, or what's the state of the affordable housing in the city?
Okay.
Mr. Boylan.
Chair Lindgren and Councilmember Muse, this is Alan Hunting. He is the city planner here for Inver Grove Heights.
Mr. Hunting, thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you. The plan, we're focusing on trying to create some other programs or things to help get some affordable housing in the city. It's been the Dakota County, there's CDA is what we've relied on so much in the past, but with the new community development director, and our goal is to try to come up with some of our own programs, do some of our own redevelopment. We've got a few areas that we're looking at and trying to get projects that will have some affordability parts of those projects.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Councilmember Mousse? Yeah, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add in, I don't know how familiar you are with Dakota County's programs that they have through the CDA, but the whole county has come together and the county levies a tax on everyone in the county to pay for affordable housing projects. They also administer the Section 8 vouchers and the tax credits, but it's been lost the word. Everybody's working together on it, as opposed to each city having to reinvent the wheel. So it's different from how Hennepin County does it, which would be what you're more familiar with. It's really, I think, a model for the whole region because everybody pays in, even if you live in a township or a little tiny city that doesn't have our regional sewer system and has no requirement for affordable housing. Everybody in the county is paying in. And there has not been any difficulty with the cities taking the projects. In fact, they line up, can we get the next one? So it's a little different culture in Dakota County.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Further questions on the report? Further questions? Seeing none, again, thanks, Mr. Hunting, for being here to answer the questions. Mr. Boylan has proposed a series of actions related to the City of Anchor Grove Heights 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval?
Thank you. And I'll take that as a motion and a second.
There you go.
There further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. We will move on to business item 6, 2019-256 JT, the City of Stillwater 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Ms. Wendell, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Corinne Wendell, District Sector Representatives for Districts 11 and 12. I'd like to let the committee know that we do have two members from the city. We have the Community Development Director, Bill Turnblad, here with us, as well as Lance Bernard, their consulting planner. I'd also like to give the city a sincere appreciation for all of their hard work on this plan.
Thank you, and thanks for being here.
And with that, before you today is a review of the City of Stillwater's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. The map here shows the location of regional system components within the City of Stillwater. We have Trunk Highway 36 that runs along the southern boundary of the city. And we also have the Central Greenway North and Middle St. Croix Valley Regional Trail Search Corridors that are included in the plan. Stillwater is located in east central Washington County. It's surrounded by the communities of Stillwater Township and Oak Park Heights, Lake Elmo, and Grant. And then Thrive MSP 2040 designates the city as suburban. In terms of their forecasted growth, Table 1, also in your staff report, shows that between 2020 and 2040, the council forecast shows that the city will grow by about 2,200 people, representing 1,200 households, and the equivalent of about an increase of 1,000 jobs within that same time period. And then in terms of the planned residential density, also shown in Table 2 from your staff report, illustrates what the suburban community designation would look like for the city. The overall designation, the overall density for guided residential of the land is expected to be between 7 and 15 units per acre. And so communities within that suburban designation under Thrive are expected to plan for forecasted population and household growth at average density of at least 5 units per acre. And so Stillwater's plan is consistent with this policy. The city's existing land use map refers to Figure 3 in the staff report. The existing land uses in Stillwater are predominantly residential, almost at 36%. And then there's also about 16% of open water and wetland. And then parks, trails, and recreation account for about 10%. And then approximately 5% each of commercial and industrial. And so the major commercial areas are located along Trunk Highway 36 within the historic downtown, shown in kind of that pink color on the map. So the city's future land use map refers to Figure 4 in the staff report. The plan does highlight specific areas of change and areas of focus for the future land use map, including the expansion of the neighborhood commercial land use designation, which is that hot pink color on the map, and then the addition of a community commercial shown in red on the map, And then highway mixed use categories is that red hatched color. And then that will take place kind of along Highway 36 between Highway 5 and Highway 66. To highlight a part of the Stillwater's plan, the plan identifies in chapters 5 and 6 that preservation of historic properties as well as downtown development are two key areas that the city focuses on. As one of the oldest cities in Minnesota, Stillwater continues to plan for growth as well as enhancing their preservation efforts. And so this is shown in their downtown planning and these conceptual drawings for improvements within Stillwater. And so with that, the plan does conform to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, with the proposed changes to the sewer service forecast in a downward trajectory, and then also compatible with the plans of adjacent and local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. Their meeting schedule, similar to other plans, they will be seen at the Environment Committee on September 24th, and then with the full council on October 9th. I would like to remind the committee that we do have members from Stillwater here present, and then with the proposed action to authorize the city of Stillwater to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the city's sewer service forecast downward, as shown in Table 2 of the review record, and also to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for transit. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Turnbutt, Mr. Bernard, for being here as well. Questions on that report? Any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Wendell brings forward 3 proposed actions related to the City of Stillwater 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Is there a motion for approval? Thank you, council member. Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
May I just,
Councilmember Vento.
I really want to commend the city for including that information about preservation of the historical downtown. Some of the best memories I have, and hopefully this continues into the future as well, are in Stillwater. I have family that lives in Stillwater, and it's a remarkable community. And for me, the best time of year is autumn. So if you need a real pick-me-up, now is the time to, well, almost now, give it another week or two, go to Stillwater, because it is just so gorgeous this time of year, every time of year, but especially this time of year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, council member. Thank you. Moving on the agenda to business item number 7, it's 2019-257. It's the City of Scandia 2040 Comprehensive Plan. Ms. Wendell.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This item before you for the City of Scandia. City staff is not able to be present this afternoon, but I would like to also give my appreciation to their staff for their diligence in getting their plan to us and to have such a great working relationship with them.
Thank you.
And so, in terms of regional system components within the City of Scandia, the regional parks and park preserve and special recreation features located within the city include Big Marine Park Reserve. The city is provided wastewater services through a combination of private and public communal wastewater treatment systems and individual subsurface sewage treatment systems, or SSTSs. Their community designation, they're designated by Thrive as diversified rural. Scandia is located in the northern part of Washington County, as you can see here, and is also surrounded by the communities of Chisago County, Lake Township, Franconia Township, Farmington Township, Marine on St. Croix, May Township, Hugo, Forest Lake, and Chisago City. There is a proposed community designation change for a part of Scandia. As shown in that kind of lighter yellow color, the plan does propose a change for the village center area towards the center of Scandia to be classified as rural center, and is also shown in figure 3 of your staff report. So Thrive calls for rural center communities to plan for and stage development for forecasted growth through 2040 and beyond at overall average net densities of at least 3 to 5 dwelling units per acre. And so the village center is served by an existing public communal wastewater system and has a historic developmental pattern consistent with capacity available in that local system. In terms of forecasted growth, in Table 1, you can see between 2020 and 2040, council forecasts show that the city will grow by about 695 people, representing 400 households, and there will be an increase of 110 jobs in the city in that same time frame. And then their existing land use, also referred to Figure 3 in the staff report, shows that the predominant land use in the city is undeveloped at around 41%. Agriculture is about 25%, and then single-family is about 10%. The city is also home to a historic village area where most of the development of the community is located. And so for their 2040 planned land use, as you can see here and in Figure 4 of your staff report, the plan does encourage a vibrant village center and surrounding residential neighborhoods with the village mixed use and village neighborhood land uses, shown in that yellow and orange color towards the center of Scandia. And then the plan also describes a new rural mixed use district, which is west of Big Marine Lake, towards the southwestern part of the map. And the new land use category, shown kind of in that gold color, is intended to allow for single-family residential development connected to the Big Marine Lake rural commercial area. And so we do find that the plan conforms to Metropolitan system plans, is consistent with council policies, consistent with the proposed changes to community designation, and compatible with the plan for local governmental units and affected jurisdictions. And then for this plan, it will be seen by the full council on October 9th. Seeing as that it does not have a regional wastewater system, it won't be seen by the Environment Committee. And so the proposed action is to authorize the City of Scandia to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect, to revise the community designation for the village center portion of Scandia, as shown in Figure 3, from diversified rural to rural center, and then to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for surface water management. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Wendell. Questions? Councilmember Vento.
Can you shed any light on the mining portion on the current and future land use maps? What are they mining for?
Ms. Wendell.
Thank you, Chair and Councilmember Vento. Would Lisa like to describe that area? If you
Mr.
would,
Chair, Councilmember Vento, for some reason I remember these things from years ago. Actually, Washington County mining is primarily sand and gravel, especially because of the topography that's in that area. So areas that are not overlain by a state park or natural area already, as you've seen, there's lots of natural areas, are often used for mining before they're restored. And that sand and gravel helps with construction and building in the region.
Exactly. Okay. I was just curious. Thought maybe there were diamonds there. Property adjacent. It worked.
Just the gravel.
Further questions on that report? Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, yes. I just think it's probably pretty exciting for the city to have this new classification for the density in the residential.
Yeah.
And I also noticed that it has some civic use opportunities, so that that would be exciting to follow that plan.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool. Further discussion? Did you have a comment, Ms. Wendell?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further discussion on that report? Seeing none, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Wendell, for your work. We will move on to business item 8, which is 2019-226, the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail Master Plan. And this really is the final piece of master planning for this, correct? So we have Mr. Kelly, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right.
Indeed, yes.
So it's Mr. Kelly, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and council members. I am, yes, it's true, Colin Kelly, Regional Parks Planning Analyst, and I'm here to present the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail Master Plan on behalf of Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. As you may know, the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail is located near the center of the regional park system within Hennepin County in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Anthony Village. You also may know the Grand Rounds is the nation's largest urban scenic byway, stretching over 50 miles and encircling more than 3/4 of the city of Minneapolis. It connects several iconic regional parks, including Central Mississippi Riverfront, Mississippi Gorge, Minnehaha, Nokomis, Hiawatha, Minneapolis Chain of Lakes, and Theodore Wirth. It makes those connections through a series of contiguous regional trails and scenic parkways, including Minnehaha, Victory Memorial, and St. Anthony Parkway. Originally conceived by Horace Cleveland and other visionaries in the early days of the Minneapolis park system, the Grand Rounds is a unique example of a connected park system created for the benefit of the residents and visitors of Minneapolis. The missing link, approximately 5 miles in length, is the one uncompleted section of the Grand Rounds parkway system. Initially, the presence of wetlands in the missing link area deterred construction. Later, a large and profitable gravel mine was an obstacle to parkway development. When gravel mining ceased in the 1950s, the area was developed with industrial uses. Today, there are many public and private landowners along the route, including the Minnesota Department of Transportation, the University of Minnesota, Hennepin County, and the cities of Minneapolis and St. Anthony Village. Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF, also owns railroad lines along the route. For your reference, the map in the center of your slide is Figure 4 from the staff report. According to the master plan, coordination with those agencies has been central to the planning process, and formal agreements will be developed with the corresponding agency prior to implementation. Extensive community engagement took place with the Grand Rounds missing link as part of the East of the River master planning effort. The engagement process unfolded over more than 18 months and involved a wide variety of initiatives, more than 100 direct engagement events, and personal contacts with thousands of park users and area residents. Within the overall process, the Grand Rounds missing link was included in one of the targeted work groups. The Regional Trail Work Group convened multiple times to help envision and design the Grand Rounds missing link and associated amenity sites. The community had direct involvement with the project throughout the design process. With regard to public awareness, MPRB referenced its 2019 community engagement policy in the master plan and said the design and construction of the trail will require a community engagement assessment prior to implementation. Community engagement plans require staff to assess who are stakeholders in the process and how those stakeholders will be communicated with and engaged throughout the process. The plan is data-driven and established through an equity framework and requires an evaluation of the engagement after the project is completed. In addition, during design and construction, it is standard practice for MPRB to notify the public of trail improvements through news releases, on-site signage, a project website, and email. Excuse me. The preferred route for the missing link passes through both public rights-of-way and privately owned properties, and a variety of land use types. The map on the left is Figure 5 in your staff report. 11 parcels have been identified for either acquisition of an easement or fee simple acquisition. Within the master plan, MPRB notes a preference for easements on 9 of the 11 parcels. The estimated cost for the acquisition of 11 parcels or easements is $18,779,918. As you may know, portions of southeast and northeast Minneapolis lack access to parks, and this regional trail provides an opportunity to bring more park-like spaces to this area. At its core, the regional trail will focus on creating a safe and welcoming environment for cyclists and pedestrians to move through the city. It will also provide opportunities for gathering, wayfinding, and stormwater management along the route, as well as other trailside amenities to bring park spaces to the underserved neighborhoods. The map in the center and the legend in the lower right-hand corner make up Figure 8 in the staff report. The estimated cost for development of the trail and the 9 amenity sites along the way is $33,930,246. All facilities within this proposed regional trail alignment will be developed in accordance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, requirements. MPRB also notes in the master plan that it recently updated its ADA action plan, which will inform the development, design, and ongoing operations of the regional trail. Council staff find that the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail Master Plan is consistent with the requirements of the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, namely Planning Policy Strategy 1, Master Plan Requirements, and other council policies. The proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council approve the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail Master Plan and require that the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, prior to initiating development of the regional trail, send preliminary plans to the Engineering Services Assistant Manager at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Services Division for review in order to assess the potential impacts to the regional interceptor system. I should note that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission voted unanimously to approve the proposed action at its September 5th meeting. And with that, stand for any questions or comments you have.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, for the report and for your work on this. Questions on that report or discussion? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
So I'll just share that MPOSC unanimously supported this project. There was a lot of excitement around the completion of the Grand Rounds. I think one of the pieces that's important in the to point out that a lot of people think about too is the above the falls region of trail that is yet to be completed but is planned to be completed. And I think a lot of people might think that that is the Grand Rounds, and the Grand Rounds is a little different. So I just wanted to kind of call that out in our presentation. You can see it on slide 3, and it's the dotted green dotted section of trail that really is along the river. And so it definitely is an enhancement and a part of the Grand Rounds, but this is the missing link is a different aspect of the trail system.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on that report? Councilmember Lindstrom.
Just curious, if all things went swimmingly, when would this actually come to fruition?
Mr. Kelly.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Lindstrom. Good question. Some sections or segments of the trail are closer to implementation than others. As was described at the MPOSC meeting, Carrie Christensen from Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board said portions on the north end and south end are virtually ready to go, could be developed within the next 5 years or so. But other segments, for example, crossings of rail yards, for example, could take much more time. And so I'm not able to put a specific time frame on that, but longer than 5 years.
Yes, understood. Thank you.
Further discussions on that report? Further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Kelly proposes that we approve the Grand Rounds Missing Link Regional Trail Master Plan and require the MPRB to send preliminary plans to Engineering Services at the Metropolitan Council's Environmental Service Division. Do we have a motion to approve? Councilmember Musse, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on that motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. And committee members, thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you.
As I gave you notice earlier, Chair Slawick has joined us. She is interested in hearing the report and the discussion on item 12. So with apologies to the staff to wait, and if Ms. Smith and Ms. Keogh are ready to present, I know your presentation is queued up. Thank you, Michelle, for taking care of that. So seeing no objection, we'll move to item 12, the Public Housing Agency Plan Approval. Ms. Keogh and Ms. Smith, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Chair. My name for the record is Terry Smith. I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. I'm here with my colleague, the HRA Manager, Jennifer Keogh. So we're going to be going back and forth a little bit with today's presentation with the goal of providing you with enough information to approve the Public Housing Agency Plan. But before we get into this, we had some lengthy discussion at the August 5th Community Development Committee around some of these policy issues, and don't want to minimize that these are very, very difficult policy decisions that you will all be making tonight. And our goal is to help you, provide you with information with which to make that decision. So with that, I will get started. So the goal of tonight, or the action before you tonight, is really to approve three things. And one piece is a 5-year plan, so that's a document that runs from 2020 to 2024. Those are really the long-range goals for the Housing Authority in terms of how we intend to meet the needs of low-income persons within the region over the long-term period of time. The annual plan is a proposed document for 2020, so that's a 1-year plan, and it's really getting into more of the details of the goals and programs that we intend to operate to, again, serve low-income families within the region. And then the administrative plan is a policy document that becomes attached to the annual plan. So this is the policy document that contains the required regulatory program rules as well as the discretionary policies. And some of these that we're going to talk about tonight are these discretionary policies. Yes.
Us being Havana.
Yeah, very thick document. And so some of these discretionary policies are things we're going to be presenting to you tonight. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the 5-year goals that we have outlined in our plan. I'm hoping you've had some time to review all of the goals that are listed there, which are quite lengthy. But we chose some of the main policy goals, and then want to talk about some of our new initiatives that we're embarking on over the next couple of years. But the first one here, I should also point out, those are 2 of our outreach team members. You've heard a lot about their work, and you'll hear a little bit about it tonight, but those are 2 of our outreach team members. But one of our goals is to maintain and increase the availability of affordable housing and be responsible stewards of financial resources. That's an ongoing goal we have, where we're trying to balance policy initiatives, being responsible stewards of financial dollars, but the ultimate goal is really to serve as many families as we can, possibly with the voucher program. One of these initiatives that we've been before you and talking about is the Moving to Work program, and how we have a goal to obtain Moving to Work designation, either through a partnership with Minneapolis Public Housing Authority or through the HUD expansion cohort for rent reform. Both of those are still in the works. We're still moving down a dual track of those, and we'll provide you with additional information as it comes available. The second one here we have is to increase assisted housing choice for all residents of the region. One of the things we've been working on over the last few years and continue is really robust outreach and landlord engagement strategies. In this market with extremely low vacancies, we have landlords that are saying no, no, no to Section 8, and our goal has been to have them say yes, yes, yes to Section 8. So we've really gone down the path of robust landlord engagement strategies, and we will continue those efforts. One of them is to encourage movement to the areas in the region with less than 20% poverty rates, and that gets at the goals of the Community Choice Program, which is the HRA's mobility counseling program, where we're working with voucher holders that want to move to new neighborhoods and helping them make that move successful. And one of the criteria there is that a community needs to have an average poverty rate of less than 20%. But one of the new initiatives here is HUD has $25 million in their approved budget for this year. Congress appropriated $25 for a mobility demonstration program funds. And so we're hoping that by now they would have issued notice for those funds. We haven't seen it. And talking with our industry partners, we're hoping to see that in the next month or so. But because we have a mobility program already in place, we're hoping that we could submit a strong application to capture some of those funds to serve residents better. Some of the other 5-year goals outlined in our plan are to administer programs to encourage integrated settings for persons with disabilities. We have several programs that target persons with disabilities, but one of the newer programs is the mainstream vouchers that we were recently awarded to serve families experiencing homelessness and using the transit system as temporary shelter. Those vouchers are targeted to non-elderly persons with disabilities. We recently applied for some additional vouchers under that program. Week before last, we submitted an application, and we will continue to apply for new funding opportunities as they become available. We, of course, want to contribute to the goal of ending long-term homelessness. The council has undertaken many actions over the last year, and the HRA for many, many years has served programs that serve primarily people experiencing homelessness. But one of the new things that we'd like to do is to continue to work on stabilizing families that are experiencing homelessness, but entering into some potential partnerships with, for example, school districts within our region and in our service area to provide rent assistance to students that are experiencing homelessness is an example of that. And then the last one I would like to highlight here is initiatives to promote self-sufficiency and stabilize families. That's our whole goal, is to stabilize families. But one of the things, and Councilmember Musa recommended this back at one of our first meetings that we had with you all, to explore home ownership opportunities. There is a federal a Section 8 housing choice voucher home ownership program. We have met with some the HRA from Rice County down in the southern part of the state. We know Mankato has a home ownership program, and we've met with the Rice County HRA to talk through them about partnerships that they have to set up the home ownership program, talking to them about their success points, and we've learned some really valuable lessons through that. And now we are committing to the public and to HUD that we are going to formally explore potential of home ownership opportunities that we will explore with you all at a later date. So Jennifer's going to talk about the specific changes, some of the specific changes that are coming before you this evening.
All right.
Ms. Keough,
Thank
welcome.
you. So as Terry talked about our 5-year plan, the annual plan is an opportunity for us to tell HUD what kind of changes that we're going to make in our administrative policies. So before you today, in that summary of changes that was attached to your business item, there were 13 total proposed changes in this document. 4 of them are required by HUD, and 9 are discretionary. So remember, a couple of months ago, we talked about mandatory changes and discretionary changes. So the mandatory ones are the ones that HUD requires, and then discretionary is where we and you as policymakers have discretion in policy. So 6 of those discretionary changes are really clarifying language and to get where policy and process need to align. And then there's 3 significant policy changes that we're going to have some conversation about tonight. And we've talked about them twice now with you, but that is a waiting list preference change, a change to adopting a biannual inspection policy, as well as a minimum $50 minimum rent policy. So just a reminder, as we discussed in August, the Metro HRA follows council engagement guidance to engage with our key parties in a way that influences the outcome. We had 3 meetings with residents in the cities of Maple Grove, Brooklyn Center, and Roseville. All of the meeting spaces were on bus lines and were held in a variety of times and days to ensure access. In addition, we extended an invitation to all of the families that would be impacted by the minimum rent policy. We had a total of 59 attendees. 7% of the families impacted by the minimum rent policy attended our meeting. The Resident Advisory Board discussed the 5-year plan, we discussed the annual plan, and then the changes to the Housing Choice Voucher Administrative Plan. We broke, at each of the meetings, we broke up into table groups so we could have smaller conversations and really facilitate good dialogue and comments. We took a heavy dive into the minimum rent policy as well as the biannual inspections, and I'll show you, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth on that later on. In addition to working with our residents, we met with our landlord advisory group, kind of a focus group that we do ongoing. We meet with them quarterly to get feedback on our policies and procedures, and we also met with our HRA staff. Nope, has been clicked for you. Thank you. I'll be like, oh, next slide. All right, so the first proposed policy change that is before you tonight is an adoption of a new waiting list preference. So as you recall, HUD allows housing authorities, so this is discretionary, HUD allows housing authorities to adopt waiting list preferences that fit their community, which in essence means that certain populations are served before general waiting list applicants. So our current waiting list preferences that we have is we have a preference for families that have been terminated or at imminent risk of being terminated from one of their programs due to insufficient funding. So for example, let's say the state Bridges program ran out of money and they would say that they were being terminated from the Bridges program. We could then give them a preference and serve them and give them a housing choice voucher. So that would be an insufficient funding preference. The other preference that we have is for waiting list placement. And we talked about that when we were opening the waiting list, that 95% were from the metro area and 5% were from out of state. So those are the preferences that we have. The preference before you tonight is what's called a move-up preference. And we talked about this in August. But what the move-up preference is it's a strategy to assist the region in solving its homelessness issue. The move-up preference would be provided to persons occupying a permanent supportive housing unit that have been deemed ready for independent living. So through this move-up preference, somebody that's a participant that's living in a PSH or a permanent supportive housing unit would move into a voucher. So they move into independent affordable housing. And then that frees up one of those permanent supportive housing units for somebody that is experiencing homelessness. So in essence, we're opening up more opportunity to house our homeless persons in the region. This move-up preference is a partnership with the Minneapolis HUD Field Office, the Minnesota Continuum of Care Coordinators, the Permanent Supportive Housing Providers, and housing authorities. We are working with the 3 local Continuum of Cares. So if you remember, we work with in Hennepin, Ramsey, and Smack for Anoka County. And each continuum is coming up with their process of identifying who would qualify for this move-up preference. And the preference language that we have put into policy is that we would set aside 40 of our turnover vouchers. So every year, we would set aside 40 of our vouchers for this initiative. All right, that's questions before I move on to biannual inspections.
Committee members, questions at this point? Any questions? Seeing none, Ms. Keough, please continue.
So she failed me on the next slide. So the next policy proposal that's before you is to talk about adopting the expansion use of biannual inspections. So we talked about this in August, but HUD changed the rules in 2014 that allows housing authorities to do inspections of their assisted units biannually versus every year. We have been piloting biannual inspections since 2015. And HUD set this up really as a way to streamline operations and to reduce administrative burden. In the last year, in the last 12 months, we inspected 11,956 units. We estimate that after an implementation, a phase-in implementation, that this would save us 3,000 inspections per year. So as we were looking at this came out of an operational assessment. I think Terry and I have talked to you about this before, is we had an assessment done of how, cost and cost-saving measures and how can we be more efficient. And this is one of the things that really kind of bubbled up, is this is a really great way for you to save some administrative money. As we know, the administrative fees for the voucher program continue to be cut, right? So when we look at it, there's obviously pros and cons, right? So some of the pros of biannual inspections is that it reduces how many inspections we're doing per year. It's a cost savings. It makes us more efficient. We're looking at how we can be more efficient with the use of our inspectors' time, how they're going out and doing the inspections by city, by owner, and saving on travel time. We can refocus the administration of our program to doing more robust education with our landlords and our tenants in regards to prepping for inspections and how to be ready to pass your inspection on the first time. And obviously, it's a landlord recruitment strategy. What landlord wouldn't like to hear that that there's a reduction in administrative burden from us? When we looked at what would be, some cons of this, is, and we've talked about this, the tenant's fear of the owner not repairing things timely, right? Fear of retaliation if they told the housing authority that their owner wasn't keeping up with repairs. Landlords may rely on us to track the unit condition. So those are some of the things that we have considered as we've moved through this over the last 9 months.
Ms. Q, I have a question from Councilmember Chambliss, please.
Yes, thank you. I understand the savings by having this be biennial. I know there's, two sides of it, the tenant and also the landlord. I'd like to know if we could include an option, and maybe this already exists, for the tenant to request an exception for the inspection. And how do we, given that that's the case, and I'm assuming that it is, that they can do that, how do we communicate that that option does exist and you should not fear retaliation for the request?
Ms. Kehoe.
Chair and council member, I think we'll talk a little bit about what that phase-in implementation looks like. We are in that design process, right, of how this will play out. So a tenant that if I'm understanding you correctly, would say, I want to be an annual inspection.
Either, if I may, either I would prefer to have the annual inspection based on past experience, or based on a new experience, I think I would like to have an inspection before the biennial time period.
Yes. Chair, council member, absolutely. We call those special inspections or complaint inspections, and we're working through that process. And that was one of the things that we spent a lot of time with our tenants talking about is, how should we do that? How do we roll this out? How do we make sure that you know, and that and the families that we're serving know that they can request the complaint inspection? And so we've worked through, and I would say we're still in kind of that design phase of what that process would look like. One of the things we talked about with the tenants is if they decided they wanted an inspection of their unit, is they would call the housing authority. We would talk through it with them. We would also then engage in conversation with their landlord and let them know that we had some concerns and offer them the opportunity to tell us what they've been doing to remedy the situation. And then from there, determine what we do. Do we go out and do that special inspection? Do we allow the owner some time to remedy the situation with the tenant? And so I think that process needs to be ironed out a little bit, but those are the kind of the processes that we were talking about with tenants, is what makes the best sense to make sure that the owner makes the repairs in a timely fashion and the tenant gets what they need as well.
Yes, I would hesitate to approve this unless I know that we're taking, some of the savings from this and putting it into some communication pieces, brochures, so that, they understand the right, and not just initially, because sometimes people miss it and the mail doesn't get to them, etc.
We have
So if we can get that info.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, we have a future slide on this exact topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have council members in queue for questions. Council members Cumming and Lindstrom. Councilmember Cumming.
Thank you, Chair. And maybe this is in a future slide, but can you quantify what the savings would be, approximately the 3,000 inspections we might not be doing? And is that money then targeted for administrative purposes only, or can it be used in other ways?
Ms. Smith?
Take that one.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Cummings, it's about the equivalent of one full-time inspector. So it's essentially a one full-time equivalent. So then we'll have some decisions to make in terms of, do we lighten the load of all inspectors so that they all have additional time to, because I think it makes a lot of sense. How do we educate our landlords better so they pass their inspection on the first time, so we don't have to go out twice? How do we spend more time educating our tenants on health and safety issues in their home, and how to report those in a timely manner before they turn into, serious health and safety things? So it's a matter of, how we decide to structure that, but it's about a one full-time employee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From our last conversation in August, my impression was that there would be annual inspections unless the unless the landlord did a certain number of good things, and then that they would we would have this carrot approach, like you do these great things, these good things, and then you get the biannual.
Yep.
Do I have the correct understanding? So it's kind of the assumption is there will be annual inspections, but if you do these smart things, biannual. Is that right?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, we're going to talk about the qualifying criteria in a couple of slides. So, yes, that's
Great.
one of the strategies.
All right. Let's continue, Ms. Kehoe.
Okay.
So in that deeper dive that we did with our resident advisory board, we asked the following questions. What do you think are good reasons to implement the policy? What do you think are reasons not to implement the policy? What should be the requirements to complete a complaint inspection? What should the qualification to continue to be biannual consist of? So Councilmember Lindstrom, that kind of gets to that. How do you continue to qualify for that? And then what might be some unintended consequences of only inspecting every 2 years? So we met with our resident advisory board for 2 hours, and we spent about an hour on biannual inspections and then an hour on the minimum rent policy. What did we hear? I don't want to, in your business item, there were the summary of comments from the resident advisory board. Things that we heard as far as the good reasons, obviously the cost reduction, understanding that what the impacts are from a cost reduction, and they liked the thought of the inspectors being able to streamline how they were doing it, going into one city, being efficient with their time. They liked that it was less stress for tenants having to prepare for inspections, and many of them have multiple inspections in their unit, so a little less stress to do that. And they liked that it's an incentive. Our voucher holders know it's very hard to place their vouchers, and to be able to have that as a reward for a landlord or as an incentive would open up opportunities in potentially properties where they might not be able to place their voucher. Reasons not to implement the policy, things that we heard were landlords potentially letting their units fall into disrepair, that tenants may not keep up their units because nobody's coming to check on them every year. Tenants may be afraid to report issues. Would that increase the amount of complaint inspections coming into the housing authority? As far as what should the requirements be to complete a complaint inspection, we talked about this, talking through, do we have some type of certification form that the owner provides? Is it that the tenant contacts the HRA, and then we have that conversation with the owner, and then and then we go out and do the complaint inspection, but giving the owner time to remedy that situation. We talked about the qualifications to continue to be biannual. What did we hear? Is having a checklist, so making sure that owners know exactly what we're going to be going out and looking at, and so taking the time to prepare our landlords. We talked a little bit about spending time doing one-on-one education with our landlords. That's proven to be successful when we've done that. Tracking common failures was something that the tenants thought would be a good thing. Talking about how many items could they fail for before they no longer qualify for a biannual inspection. So those are the things that we talked about with our resident advisory board. As far as the unintended consequences, they kind of revert back to the reasons not to do it, right? Is the complaint inspections, fear of retaliation. Those are those unintended consequences of a policy change. And then as far as implementation, we spent a lot of time, I think, with our team here at the HRA, as well as with our landlord group and our residents, talking about how do we implement this. And so that gets to is looking at qualifying criteria. And I don't think that we have gotten to a a complete decision on this, but this is where we're landing right now, is that to skip your 2020 inspection, and we'd have to do this, we'd have to do a rollout because we can't skip everybody or we'd be doing no inspections, right? So it's a phase in implementation, is that if you passed your inspection in 2019 with 5 items or less, and we're talking about non-life threatening items, then you would qualify to have a biannual inspection the next year. And then we would monitor that on an ongoing basis. I think that's what's really important, is that we'll be looking and looking and analyzing the data, and monitoring that. The other, talking about the owner education again, I think that's been one of our big goals, is to set up curriculum for owner education. It would be done to, again, help owners better prepare for initial and annual inspections. We've identified throughout my time here some owners that continuously fail at their initial inspection, and we've reached out to them and said, hey, can we come out and train your maintenance staff and your staff and talk to you about how to prepare to pass your inspection on the first try? And we went from like a 49% fail rate up into the upper 80s, 90s on that first try, which we think is a success. And if we could expand that across the board, I think would be worth our weight in gold. So I think I'm going to pause there and take any questions that you have.
Good timing, Ms. Keel. Question from Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Sir Chair. So I have a question about the incentives, and I'm not sure if I heard everything about that in terms of, I heard, there's more vouchers available. Can you tell, maybe I just missed that part completely. Can you tell me what the incentives are for the landlords, if they, besides just not having to do it biennial, in terms of opening up opportunities in terms of housing and housing revenue or whatever it is?
Ms. Keel.
Mr. Chair, Council Member. So the incentive, I think, when we look at how do we recruit new landlords, and we put sort of this package together of, here are the things that you're required to do as an owner, sort of the steps to working with the housing authority. And one of the things that we hear is that, there's paperwork and there's all these, inspections and different things, right? And so they're reluctant to want to work with us because of that. So if we're able to say, this is an incentive or this is a reward for participating, we're hoping that helps owners want to opt in to participate in the program. So there's not a financial incentive. Maybe I'm using the wrong word.
Ms. Smith.
I could just maybe, Mr. Chair, add one thing. I think one of the things we hear as we engage landlords over the last several years is they don't like inspections. Who likes inspections, right? So if they can if for good behavior and good results on inspections, if they can have that process once every 2 years instead of every year, that incentivizes landlords to participate. Because it's the main program component that they don't like, because we're coming in and saying you have to fix this, this, and this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Chambliss.
I just want to make sure I understand the punch to the impact of this incentive. So if they don't have to do the annual inspections, they're happy about that. But if they're not providing more opportunities for housing because of this, there's no consequence, or they don't get anything for it, right? So I'm still having a hard time understanding what the incentive is for them to meet our underlying goal.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I think it just becomes a list of things. Here's landlords, they say, I don't want to participate in the voucher program because I'm not dealing with these annual inspections. You have too much red tape, all this paperwork. I don't want to deal with that. If we can mitigate the inspection thing by saying, well, if you have units that are in good condition, we'll only come once a year instead of every year. Think about your you're a homeowner, you want to see your building inspector all the time, you probably don't, right? But so it's more so that's where the incentive comes in. It doesn't guarantee any units. It's still a voluntary choice for landlords to participate in the program. But we're thinking if we can ease the burden to landlords, they'd more likely opt into participation instead of opting out in this market.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, so are we planning to monitor those that opt in after getting this, extra benefit? And I mean, I know a lot of times we say make it cheaper for business owners, small business owners or whatever, and that way they're going to give back to the community or et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't always work that way. So since this is new, I would like to see if we can monitor that.
Sure.
And see how we can tweak it so that we're getting people to participate more in the voucher program.
Chair and council member, absolutely will track this. I think we can also track other things that go along with it, such as we hope to increase our success rate of pass on the first try because we're spending more time educating owners. So I think that's another side soft benefit that benefits tenants because we're going to pay faster if the unit passes inspection. So absolutely, we'll track it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lindstrom, then Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. You mentioned that there was a pilot in 2015, and I'm wondering what were the results of that pilot. I assume they were positive, or else you wouldn't be bringing this forward. But perhaps could you expand on that a little bit? Were there additional complaints coming from tenants? Were there results that the landlords were more pleased? How many people were in the pilot?
You want to talk to
Ms. Kehoe or Ms. Smith?
Okay.
Ms. Kehoe.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom. So the results of the pilot, so we've continued it. So we started in 2015, and each year we've expanded a few more landlords of who we're offering that opportunity to. So currently we have about 500, not owners, 500 units less that we're inspecting each year. The results of that, you're correct. We wouldn't be bringing this forward to you if we were seeing negative impacts. Owners have given us feedback that they have appreciated that. We have, what I think our inspectors do a really good job of is that relationship with the maintenance staff and the on-site staff. So when they're coming in, they're building that relationship and talking through concerns that they have, and using it as a tool to educate owners on things that they are concerned about. And so, but we have not seen a reduction in our fail rate because of this. I will say, from like a statistics standpoint, apartment complexes, because that's their multifamily, right? They pass at a higher rate than a single family homeowner. So like an apartment complex passes 76% of the time on the initial inspection and for 3.3 failed items. A single family home passes 48% of the time on the first inspection with an average of 8.9 fail items. So where we could spend some time probably is doing some one-on-one with our single family home landlords as well. But yeah, we would not be bringing this forward to you if we didn't feel like it was an opportunity to do more.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Hi, thank you, Chair. I really was thinking about, was doing a little looking around what are the top kind of violations or deficiencies, I think was the word that I was trying to find if there was something here locally, looking at the federal level. Like most common things are like an inoperable fridge, or inoperable stove, or inoperable or missing, it said. And so I'm curious, that's not a life-threatening issue, but so would people be able to get on that 2-year list if they have had rental properties that have had kind of the basic things that you need to live in dignity there, like a working refrigerator and a working stove?
You take that one.
or working bathrooms, working heat, those kinds of things.
Ms.
So,
Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, no heat would be life-threatening, so
Sure.
that wouldn't qualify. But if we, for example, go out on an annual inspection, one of the top fail items is fridge gaskets for some reason. They get moldy, they don't seal properly, and then they don't cool the food properly. That's a fail item, but it's not life-threatening. We go out, we give the landlord 30 days to make that repair. If that landlord isn't responsive and doesn't make the repair, they're not going to make the biennial list. If the landlord is responsive and repairs items within a reasonable amount of time, 30 days, then they could still make the list.
Okay.
And so we're looking at, and the current process for biennials is very, very limited. So we're only looking at units where there are 5 or more units, there are apartments there. So very limited criteria. But under this new scenario, if a single family homeowner, they take good care of their property, they have 5 or less non-life threatening fail items, they could get biennial. The other thing that I would mention is with the special inspections, you know, this is the third bullet down, we're setting up that process. We now get lots of special inspection requests. If there's no heat in a unit in the winter, we're going to send an inspector out and do a special inspection. We're going to do that same thing if someone's on biennial. And if the landlord doesn't comply with what they need to do, we stop the payment, and then, you know, they can be removed from biennial for the next year. So our goal in this is to continue to make sure tenants are living in safe units, which is why the tenant education piece is so important. We want to work with tenants to make sure they're clear on our process with how do they request a complaint or a special inspection to make sure they're living in safe units.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. So I heard 2 things there. Larger units, they wouldn't make the biennial list if they had more, but it was a smaller number of unit, and then they could make the biennial list if it wasn't a life-threatening issue. Just
Ms. Smith.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember, sorry for the confusion. Our current process only allows apartments, multifamily buildings for biennial.
Okay.
Under our new process, we're thinking it will be based on the previous year's inspection and how number of fail items and the type of building. One of the most common fail items is cracked outlet plate covers. It's easy to fix.
Cracked out what?
Cracked outlet plate covers. It's crazy, but it's one of the top fail items. So it's, you know, if a landlord has a couple of those, a missing light bulb is a fail item because the open socket. If it's, you know, things like that, they can qualify, you know, for biennial. But
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
So I would just encourage to keep thinking about those most common things and how do those really impact the quality of life, and really, again, like I said, the dignity of living. After the tornado hit North Minneapolis, I was door knocking, and weeks after, there were still people who were living without a fridge. Who were in all those situations were situations where they were landlord rentee situations, and they just didn't have to respond. And all the challenging things that come from that. If you're getting food assistance, food stamps, and your fridge isn't maintaining food well, you use the food stamps to put in the fridge. The food goes bad. You don't get more food stamps. Was one of the things that I learned. Also, working with young people, I really encourage also you to think about the different types of audiences that might be engaged in this. Young renters under 25, particularly English language learners, vulnerable, different, you know, people with disabilities, are already dealing with a resource and power disparity in relationship to the landlord. And so reaching out to them, a brochure may not be the right thing. It takes multiple touches. So thinking about other partnerships. In my work with Juxtaposition, we had a lot of young people who were on their own, living in apartments at 19, 18. I thought this brought up for me as 2 young brothers who were living in an apartment. One was 22 and the other was less, I think either 19 or 20, and their heat consistently wasn't working. And they mentioned it at work when their oven stopped working because they had been heating their apartment with their oven. And that is how there's been many fatal fires, particularly in North Minneapolis. So we were like, no, and they brought it up so we could tell them what to do and how to deal with the situation. And when they did what we said, it was handled. So I just think that we often don't think about the younger people who are just getting into renting. You don't know what to expect, or what to advocate for, or what are the resources out there, what's right or what's wrong, and you really feel like you don't have any power in the situation, so you don't think to ask or to call someone or to see if there's someone to call. So I just think with this shift, in addition to the special complaints, thinking through the marketing of that resource, but really also thinking through that dynamic of someone who's living in a situation that may really be taking their dignity away from them due to those difference in power dynamics and the resources to call on. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kehoe.
I am going to turn it over back to Terry.
So
Smith.
we're going to make a shift to the minimum rent. And this one, as you all know, had the most discussion at our August 5th meeting, is probably the most difficult decision out of the three to make. As you recall, so this is a third policy area where we're recommending a change, and we're recommending adoption of a $50 minimum rent policy for the Housing Authority. As you know, the HRA currently operates at a deficit, and for this year it's projected to be 1.9 million. Some decision points that your predecessors made and that you will also be faced with making, and some policy decisions later this fall around rent limits and so on, impact this. But under our current scenario, with our $1.9 million deficit, we were either need to reduce our program size by 200 families, look at cost saving measures, or subsidize with other funds, or some combination of the three of those items. So I want to make it clear, we're not proposing that adopting minimum rent solves our budget deficit issues. It's one piece of items that we are looking at. But as we indicated back in August, HUD requires housing authorities to adopt a minimum rent anywhere between $0 and $50 per month. We have approximately 270 families, or 4% of our voucher holders, that would be impacted by this policy change if we were to make that today. I have some examples for you in future slide that shows the impact of this to families, because what it doesn't mean that families will all get a $50 rent increase tomorrow if we implement this. It depends on where their income is today, what tenant paid utilities they have, and there are things that impact it. So I'm going to, excuse me, show you a couple slides of how that will work. I have my water. But I will say that most of the families that will be impacted by this many of them are at zero income. And with our working with families at zero, or what we call unrealistic income, which are very, very low income, these are families that have $2,000 to $3,000 per year in annual income. We know that in most of those cases, those are temporary situations where a family or household members are between jobs. They're waiting for eligibility for maybe a public benefit program, or a variety of circumstances. And we know by working with families that these are often temporary situations. So here's one example of how this $50 minimum rent can play out. On the left side of the screen, this is the current scenario. So for the purposes of these slides, I think it's important to know that total tenant payment means tenants pay rent according to their total tenant payment, which is rent plus utilities, so their gross rent. So utilities play into this. But under the scenario on the left, current situation, a family is at $0 for total tenant payment. That means they have zero income or very, very little income. The rent on a particular unit is $1,120 a month. This tenant gets a credit of $57 for tenant paid utilities. So these are utilities that the tenant is responsible for paying directly to the utility company, resulting in a gross rent of $1,177. The next line, because the tenant's rent is zero, this results in the highlighted part at the bottom. The HRA pays the full rent, which is $1,120, and we send a check to the family every single month, or it's on a card. Now it's not a check. I'm dating myself by that, but it's on a card of $57 a month to pay for those tenant paid utilities. Under a $50 minimum rent scenario on the right side, instead of having a total tenant payment, so total tenant obligation of $0, their total obligation to their housing costs would be $50. So the rent remains at $11.20. They still have tenant paid utilities of $57. Gross rent is still $11.77, but there's a $50 tenant contribution. You can see on the bottom, the full rent is still going to be paid by the housing authority, so we're still going to pay the full $11.20. The difference is this tenant will now get a $7 check from us or card instead of a $57 check to pay for their utilities. So it changes. Their rent portion remains $0. They're just getting less funding back from the housing authority to pay utility costs. And I'm hoping I can go through the next 3 slides and then answer questions, because I think a lot of questions will come that I may answer in the next couple of slides.
Certainly, Ms. I just Chair
Unfortunately.
Slawick,
Oh, yes,
so,
okay.
if I may.
So I'm going to make some comments.
Courtesy.
I have to go. I have a
sure. Okay.
relative in town that I'm meeting.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing me to come, and thank you for making the time, and thank you for changing the schedule. Sorry to the Parks people out there that had to wait. But this is a really important discussion, right? And you all have been really involved in this, and as you know, it comes to the council, and then we aren't as involved. And so I've been trying to get myself up to speed about this and read through all of the issues we've had. Just to say, in Maplewood, we've actually had the plugged toilets and the chronic issues at one particular place, and it was really rough. And so I think that that you have measures in place to do that. This one, I think is the one that I probably worried the most about, but I talked with the chair, I talked with Terry, I talked with Lisa, I've talked with the governor's office, and from my experience as being a legislator who always sat on Health and Human Services, if people pay something towards their rent, they actually are more accountable, right? Chair, we talked about that. And so I also talked to Commissioner Ho, who is the Housing Finance Agency, and we had a discussion about this. And I just have one question, okay, that I'm going to ask, and I know you're going to go on, and your discussion is going to change, and all those things. And I know you're all thoughtful people, and as the chair pointed out, I think over half the council's here.
Right,
Sort of.
yeah.
So with your colleagues, we'll need to just at least, make sure people understand this issue. But if there are evictions based on this, are you going to question just came up? Are you going to track that and report back to the council if that would happen? And I think did I talk to you, Lisa, about it? You told me that you track evictions now, right? And the cause of that. So if there was an increased cause, we would know that. And who went, Terry?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, and council members, we have very few evictions. In 2018, we had 0.2% of our program, so less than 0.5% of families that were evicted, likely very serious lease violations that resulted in that. So we had 15 evictions last year. We had 8 in 2017, 8 in 2016. But I think part of it is the important piece, and I have a slide on this in the future, one of the reasons for providing exemptions to this minimum rent policy, one of the specific federal required reasons that families are facing eviction because they can't pay their rent. And so that's a reason that a family can be granted an exemption from the minimum rent, and I'll go through that. But I think the other important piece is the Metro HRA has an outreach team of 5. We have one full-time person whose sole job is to foster tenant-landlord relationships, and so we do intervention all the time with landlords, and not all the time, but a lot of times evictions are settled before they get to that part. But we, when we get copies of eviction notices, which the landlord and tenant are required to give us a copy, we reach out to that tenant, we reach out to that landlord. Oftentimes we're connecting tenants with legal aid resources to try and prevent evictions. On the other hand, there are some times when we can't prevent that. And I think particularly what we could do in this instance is when there are serious lease violations such as drugs in a unit or something. It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. That's a serious lease violation. That's a federal program violation. There's not as much intervention we can do, But with something like this, we would reach out to the landlord. We'd have our outreach team reach out to the landlord and say, is there a way you can set up a payment arrangement with the tenant, and encourage those conversations with tenants and landlords to prevent as many evictions as we can. But we do track evictions. We do track all program participants that go off the program and the reasons for those, and we would continue to do that. And if it's related to minimum rent, we'll figure out a way in our system to track those, because this is the program policy that's the most difficult to make for you all. It's a very difficult decision, and it's the one people lose sleep over at night. And so
Exactly. Well, and thank you. And I apologize again for leaving early and thank you for allowing me to come and to speak. And I just want you all to know, I mean, there's these days when you get to do really great things with the Met Council and fun things. And then there's days like this where you have to make really hard decisions, right? That are going to affect a lot of people. And so I just want to thank you. I don't know how the vote's going to come out, but I think you're going to pass it, Mr. Chair.
We'll see.
We'll see.
I mean, this generated the most conversation.
Yeah. And just thank
any
you.
of the proposed changes.
Yeah, for a good discussion, a good debate, and for your thoughtful care in this. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair Slavic. Thanks for being here tonight. And I know Councilmember Chambliss is requesting to speak. Did you have a question, or
I
know?
can wait. It's related to the hardship exemption.
Okay.
Thanks. So if you want to get through the slides, yes, please, Ms. Smith.
That'd be good.
Thank
I have a whole slide on that. So, second example here is a family whose current total tenant payment, so total contribution to housing costs, is $40 a month. Rent on this particular unit is $900 a month. This tenant gets a credit of $37 for utilities. Gross rent is $937. This tenant currently pays $40 towards her housing costs. The housing authority pays $897 directly to the landlord, and this tenant will pay $3 to the landlord because they're getting the $37 for utilities, and their total tenant payment is $40. So they're paying today $3 to their landlord because of those tenant paid utilities. On the right-hand side, instead of having a total tenant contribution of $40, that would increase to $50 per month under this minimum rent rule. And the rent remains at $900. Utility allowance, so these are tenant paid utilities, likely electricity. This tenant probably pays their own electricity, so they get a credit of $37. They're paying $50 towards rent. So instead of the housing authority on the bottom line, they're paying $897 for rent to the landlord. We're going to pay $887. So our portion is going to go down $10. The tenant's portion is going to go up by $10. So this current tenant, instead of paying $3 for rent, would pay $13 for rent. And that's because they have some income. They're not at 0 TTP today. They're at $40 for their total contribution, and that $40 represents 30% of their income. And so my point in showing these two scenarios are we have tenants that are at 0 income having this type of impact. We have families who are paying $40, which would result in then a $10 rent change portion. So my point in showing these slides is to show that not everybody's going to get a $50 rent increase tomorrow. It just depends on what their current circumstances are. So this, as Jennifer indicated, at each of the RAB meetings, Resident Advisory Board meetings, half of the conversation was on the minimum rent discussion, and these are the questions that we asked, similar to the biennial inspection questions. But what do you think are good reasons to implement this minimum rent policy? What do you think are reasons not to implement? What could be unintended consequences of this policy change? If implemented, what do you think the best way would be to communicate this change to all the program participants? How should the impacted families be notified that their rent is going up or of this policy change? And how should we help families understand the exemptions? Because I think that's an important piece of it, is that if families want to request an exemption, it becomes very clear it's our job to help them understand how to do that. And that's one of our goals through this. Some of the RAB comments and the full comments were an attachment to the plan, so hopefully you'll have a chance to look at that. We did have one formal comment during the public comment period outside of the Resident Advisory Board from Legal Aid. Minneapolis Legal Aid, they sent a letter in, which is also attached to the PHA plan document, opposed to the minimum rent policy for the reasons you all talked about on August 5th, for the reasons we heard from the Resident Advisory Board, and for the same reasons we all know. But some of the comments made by the Resident Advisory Board were, why should we implement this policy? And the number one reason, of course, from Resident Advisory Board members was that the HRA will not have to remove any other families from the voucher program, and that providing less to some families means another family may get a voucher that may not otherwise get one. As I indicated before, this is not a holistic solution to our budget issues. We do have a $1.9 million deficit. This is a partial solution. The $162,000 savings that we would gain by minimum rent is enough to serve 18 families. So that puts some context to that for you. The other reasons to implement Resident Advisory Board comments was that it would possibly motivate families to be financially responsible and move towards self-sufficiency. The HRA could assist more families potentially from the waiting list. It could encourage families to budget with utility companies. So there are utility assistance programs out there. We could provide that information to families as we're working with tenants on implementation. Several of them said $50 is not a lot to contribute to your housing costs. And flexibility with hardships, covering all the bases with different exemptions and assuring families know their rights under the exemption policies. Reasons not to implement are people with unsteady income may not be able to pay the minimum rent. Explaining and implementing the hardship exemptions could be complicated. The administration costs related to hardship exemptions, so the staff time used in processing exemption requests. The HRA may save money, but the government overall will lose money. So, for example, it may shift to other service agencies to help pay the minimum rent, or higher court costs, for example, if tenants have to go to conciliation court was another comment. Families facing an eviction was a concern, of course, that came up, and what is the housing authority going to do, for families that are potentially facing eviction? And I talked about some of those things in response to Chair Slawick's comments. But families could end up facing hard life decisions. Buying food or paying their rent and utilities would be something that families may have to face as the reality of this. Families may move in unauthorized guests to help cover the costs. That was a comment that one family made. But I think there are similar costs that you all raised in our August meetings. In terms of additional considerations, let's see, I have 2 more slides and then we'll have questions on minimum rent, if that is okay, Mr. Chair. So additional considerations for minimum rent is, again, this is one cost containment strategy to help the voucher subsidy side of the budget. We are participating with the HUD shortfall team right now on shortfall of funds for this year to serve all families. I shared that, I think, during our budget presentation at the last meeting, but one of the recommendations in the shortfall, and in fact is in a written notice, and the recommendation from the shortfall team is to adopt a minimum rent and have housing authorities seriously look at that as an option. We had this operational assessment completed. We got the report this summer, and one of the recommendations from the operational assessment is that we adopt a minimum rent, $50 minimum rent. And I think, it's industry standard. 88% of housing authorities across the country have adopted minimum rent policies. The majority of those, so 73%, have $50 minimum rent. 13% have $25 minimum rent, and then some others have varying amounts between that. HUD did a study. This came from a HUD study, but according to HUD's study, only 1% of program participants on a national level, according to the study participants, have requested hardship exemptions. And that seemed really, really low to me when I was thinking about that. So I think it just makes our job and one of the goals of this to ensure that families understand their rights when it comes to requesting exemption hardships. And we will intentionally do that. And then another data point that we know is that 7 out of 9 housing authorities here in our region have minimum rent policies. And this 1% hardship exemption is consistent with what they're telling us, particularly Minneapolis and St. Paul. Minneapolis has a minimum rent of $75, and they can do that because they're a moving to work agency. They had 1 exemption request in 2018. St. Paul has a $50 minimum rent. They get 5 to 10 exemption requests every year. But again, that seems low to me. We want to make sure we're engaging with our residents so they know their rights for exemptions. And here's the exemptions. So the Metro HRA must, and this is a HUD federal rule, must consider exemption requests from minimum rent if the family is unable to pay it. And these are 4 mandatory types of exemptions that the housing authority must consider. If the family is waiting an eligibility determination for a public assistance program or their benefits have been suspended, we need to consider hardship. If the family would be evicted for non-payment of rent, we need to consider an exemption. If the family's income decreases, and this includes loss of employment income, we need to consider an exemption. And then if a death has occurred in the family, we would consider exemptions. Some of these exemptions are if the family submits a hardship exemption, the housing authority would make a determination on whether we don't think a hardship exists, whether a short-term temporary hardship exists, and that's less than 90 days, or a long-term hardship, which is more than 90 days, exists for this family. The federal rules also require that if we award or authorize a temporary hardship for a family, which is the less than 90%, they have to pay that minimum rent back at a future date. So say we give them a 90-day exemption because they're in between jobs, for example, and are getting looking for new employment. We would have to collect that minimum rent back, but the housing authority would set up payment arrangements with that family, set up a repayment agreement to allow them to repay that over a period of time. Long-term hardships that are longer than 90 days do not have to be paid back. So if a family member, for example, gets injured, is in the hospital and can't work for 6 months, they're going to qualify for a long-term hardship and not have to pay that those funds back under the hardship exemption. We talked about eviction, so I'm not going to talk about that again, but that's on our radar. We get that that's a big deal. And, you know, we're in the business of housing families and assisting them in being successful in their housing. And that's the whole purpose of what we do. So we're going to do everything we can so that families don't get evicted. So that's minimum rent. We can talk about the timeline after we answer questions.
Since there's only 2 slides left, Ms. Smith, why don't you just get to the last slide and then go to questions.
So this is the last slide. This is, you know, we're here today asking for your approval of the PHA plan document and the administrative plan. And after discussion today, and depending on what happens, but this will go for full council approval on the 25th. And then after that, we should have included another bullet point. Our PHA plan documents are required to be to HUD by October 15th.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. And then the final slide was the proposed action. I do have council members asking to speak. Councilmember Bento, then Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Councilmember Bento.
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Smith, in the family income decreases, including the loss of employment, does that also include medical expenses that don't result in the loss of employment, i.e. cost of insulin, that type of thing?
Ms. Smith?
Yeah, Councilmember Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Vento, yes. Okay. So it's a decrease in income. It could be loss of employment. It could be increased expenses. It's adjusted income, so yes.
Thank you. The other question I have is whether other agencies who already have the minimum rent requirement are able to partner with nonprofits that may assist families who make requests for the $50 or whatever the minimum rent is, whether or not that's a possibility. And as I asked that question, I came up with a third one, so
Right.
I promised to limit it to three. But is it possible for other entities, in addition to public assistance programs, to be of assistance to the families?
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Vento, our outreach team is very well connected in the community in terms of what resources are available for what purposes. And so they're out, that's one of the things they do with voucher holders that are having issues, maybe being evicted for non-payment of rent, to reach out to all community resources that are available. So absolutely, I think that's realistic and something we do.
You, Councilmember Vento.
Can't remember the third one.
You
I'll
can
think of it, come back to it.
Thanks.
It was good, too.
So I have waiting to speak Councilmembers Atlas Ingebrigtsen, Chambliss, and Cummings. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. Can you remind me the total amount that we anticipate collecting for the minimum rent?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, it's projected today's dollars and the program participants and their income today, it's $162,000 a year.
Councilmember?
Yep. So I apologize because I have an engagement I have to get to, but I just really have. I know I shared this feedback the last time I received this information, but I believe during this conversation today, you shared that minimum rent that it was communicated that minimum rent would provide housing to 18 families.
Ms. Smith?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, $162,000 a year is enough to cover the subsidy portion based on average subsidy payment to 18 families. That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember?
Thank you, Chair. Last point is that I just deeply feel concerned that the cost of administering all the different aspects that would come up as it relates to this would definitely eat into that amount. And I just have a hard time seeing that going away. I mean, that was something that many people shared, that the administrative costs and challenges that would come up just even collecting it. Like, have we gotten to the point where we looked at and audited for that? Like, what would additional administrative costs and things be projected at, and then how would that fit into that $162,000?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, we're not collecting any money, so the payments go to the landlord. So it's the housing authority's payment would decrease and the family's payment would increase. So it's the landlord that's collecting the rent, where the housing authority would experience administrative costs is reviewing. I think initially there would be some time explaining the policies, engaging with tenants on the exemption policies. On the front end, one-time cost, but I think ongoing, the cost would be reviewing exemption requests. And, based on the national figures and the local figures, there aren't that many exemption requests, because I think part of that is if it's a short-term request, families understand that they have to pay that back. And maybe it's easier to pay it up front, but if they do need that exemption, we will process that. But I think the administrative time is processing exemption requests and helping families understand what their rights are for the exemptions.
Councilmember? Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us all the information that you've given us over, the various council meetings that we've had. I have a few questions. One is related to on page 11 of the presentation regarding our deficit.
This here?
Yes,
Okay.
decision points subsidized with other funds. I take it that means that if there is the opportunity in our budget where we can move some funds around, that might help change the formula for this program. So I'd like to look at that. Also, I'd like to look at or propose a modification to the minimum dollar amount. I know that some organizations are having a $25 minimum instead of the $50 minimum. We could also look at another option where those who do have some income would have a little bit more than the net $10 increase. So I think that would be much better than folks who we know do not have the income currently, where they would get some additional relief. I'd like to have, Mr. Chair, one more item, and that is you mentioned that some people may have a hardship that lasts greater than or equal to 90 days and maybe wanting an extension, potentially expanding that time period until we have a chance to see what the impact of the minimum rent would be is also an option. So I think maybe before we make a decision, let's take a look at some additional options before we pass this.
Ms. Smith, so we are on a timeline, correct? We have to approve our plan as per HUD. So the timeline that you showed us earlier is the timeline that we need to be on, correct?
So, Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Chambliss, a couple of things. The time frames for exemptions, a 90-day period, that's regulatory, so that's a federal requirement. We don't have the ability to change those 90 days, for payback under over 90 days. What we could do, I envision that we will have some families that requested a temporary hardship for 90 days, and then their hardship continues for longer than that, so then we could just grant another 90 days, or maybe we move it into a long-term hardship. We'd have to figure out how that works, but those time frames are set. In terms of using additional funds, I'd just like to respond to that.
Please.
We dug into that at our last CDC meeting about the use of additional funding, and we are restricted to using Section 8 reserves only to fund vouchers, and that pot is shrinking rapidly, and so we don't have a whole lot of resources, which is why partly why we're having this conversation with you all on this minimum rent policy. But the time frame, we do have to submit a PHA plan to HUD by October 15th. If the committee decides they do not want to approve the minimum rent recommendation, that you have the right to do that, and then we would submit the document without the minimum rent policy in it. Either way, we have to submit a document to HUD.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Can you give how much time do we have if we were to, let's say, modify the minimum amount?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, I think you can do that at your discretion by whatever you approve this evening.
So procedurally, I think Councilmember Chambliss says once there's a motion on the table, you could amend it, or you could bring a different amount forward. But yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And her responses have helped me to request a motion to modify the minimum payment to $25.
So Councilmember, I'm just going to ask you, wait till we have the main motion in front of us, or did you want to handle that motion now, or?
Yes.
Okay, so is there a second?
Are we seconding an amended main motion that hasn't been made
procedurally,
yet?
I'm just not quite sure how this slots in. So once the motion's before us, or a motion's before us,
Then make an amendment.
right, then you can make that motion. But if I could ask you to please refrain until we get through the discussion and get to the, I mean, your intent is clear.
Okay.
You intend to make, so
that's great.
I'll certainly respect your intent. So thanks. Thank you, Councilmember. Waiting in queue, Councilmembers Cumming, Vento, and Lindstrom. Councilmember Cumming and Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope this is the hardest decision that we're ever going to have to make, because this is just really, really, really tough. And I expressed my strong reservations in August, and since then I've gone through all of the information that I can find that you've provided and the studies, and done some independent study as best I could and so forth. And
I think that to not reduce the program size by having the minimum rent of $50 is really important. I think the 18 families or voucher holders that could be accommodated by the $50 minimum rent is very significant. I think the fact that the industry standard, and I know there are lots of variations and things like that, but I think that moving into that is gives me some solace that we're kind of moving into the majority of what most housing authorities do. I think the 1% of participants impacted by the minimum rent policy request has to be watched really, really closely because there could be lots of reasons for that. However, that is encouraging. I think that there is no decision. Clearly, this has to be dealt with, and every action is going to have an offsetting negative action as well, consequence as well, and that is the pressures are growing and they're probably going to continue to grow because that's the world in which we're currently living, unfortunately. And I think dealing with it now is important. I would prefer to do the $50 rather than, and I know we haven't gotten that far yet, but just in going through this and thinking about it, rather than the 25, I don't want to do 25 and then have to have this conversation again in a couple of years. I'd rather implement it now and move forward with it. I think that there are no easy answers. And I'm hoping also on the biennial inspections, if I can step back to that for a second, I hope that the incentivization, I know that I found in my other work when I was a mayor, was that a lot of the reluctance that I would hear is there are so many regulations, there's the inspection, there's the blah, blah, blah. So hopefully the incentivization there is in attracting more people willing to be in the program and accept housing choice vouchers because the criteria is not so odious for a landlord. So maybe there's some offset there. I think I appreciate this information. I think it's been really helpful and kind of for me going through all of the criteria, all of the outcomes, and it's a bad choice. I mean, it's a hard choice. It's just there are no easy answers, I guess, is the bottom line. I think that this is a route that we have to go down, and I appreciate the way that you laid this out because it makes it easier for me to understand. And you too, and others on the staff are so immersed in this issue and look at and consider every option available, and certainly are far more versed in the options. And they're just not a lot, and they're not good, and to try to put the pieces together to benefit the most is terribly challenging. So I have kind of come full circle here and think that this is something that would be helpful in dealing with the crisis that we are in, although I recognize that it would be a hardship for some. Hopefully we can find ways to mitigate some of that.
Thank you, Councilmember. I have in queue Council members Bento, Lindstrom, Lee, and Atlas Ingebrigtsen. And Councilmembers, I'm going to try to move us toward a motion here. But I want to make sure everyone gets their questions answered. And Councilmember Wolf.
Mine will be a comment. It's just people are now getting into comments.
Agree. This is more like argument on a motion. So that's why, yep. Right. So, but I do have in queue Councilmembers Bento, Lindstrom, Lee, and Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I was going to ask a procedural question,
Yep.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Will this be a consent item or a regular action item at the September 25th
Director
meeting?
Barajas.
Mr. Chair, council members, given the extent of your conversation, this is not likely to be on consent. So, and of course, we take the direction of your committee of that. So if you're obviously in preparing that.
So, yeah, this will not be on consent.
Mr. Chair, although we don't have the motion on the second yet, I want to echo what Councilmember Cummings said. I have gone full circle multiple times to the point where I think I'm permanently dizzy, and it's probably going to continue for a long time. I've not been as involved in homeless issues as a number of people on the council, and certainly the council staff have been, but I've been involved enough with nonprofits to know how many families we have who are in dire need, how many individuals and families who are in dire need. And having worked for a downtown parish, I would regularly see folks struggling with housing and multiple hardships. I have a friend whose son and daughter-in-law and infant grandchild are struggling with housing, and I just know how desperate that family is to try and find some stability. So to the extent that we can have this conversation now, knowing that we'll have a lengthy conversation, I'm sure, at the full council meeting, I'm inclined to follow the recommendations of the staff, and I would also ask that as committee members and the full council as council members, that we not think that this is the end of this conversation. I think we all have to be in regular communication with those who represent us in Washington. What really makes my head spin tonight is to know that there's a billionaire family out there making money off of opioids. Their company has filed for bankruptcy. This family has more homes than we could count on with probably all of our fingers and toes together. And there are such inequities in this country, and many of the inequities, in my opinion, are criminal for a whole lot of reasons. So I think we've really got to weigh in on housing and making sure that everybody has a fair chance at housing, and that includes making tough decisions like this.
Thank you, Councilman Brigham. Committee members, I want to move us toward a motion here, but I want to make sure everyone has their questions answered. So, Councilmember
You
Lindstrom.
want a motion first, or you want to?
Well, people are in queue, so I think in fairness to them, but I would ask, yeah.
Is yours a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two or maybe three questions. First of all, you said this was a recommendation of the operational assessment. I'm curious what that means.
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, we hired a national consultant this summer to come in and do an operational assessment of the HRA operations, and the purpose of that was to, knowing that we have this deficit and have for a few years, knowing that reserves are not a sustainable option to fill those gaps, having a consultant come in and look at our operations to identify potential efficiency areas, identify areas where we can improve policies, practices, procedures, those kinds of things. And this was one of actually biennial inspections. And their recommendation was to go to full biennial, just completely inspections every 2 years, which to me is, it's easier to move in baby steps. But another one was adopting a minimum rent, a $50 minimum rent.
Thank you.
So
we, Mr. Chair, we have, what's the number that of individuals impacted by the minimum rent was 270? That's correct? So, but we have all of these exemptions. Do we have any idea after the exemptions what the number of people that will be impacted? Will it be 150, 50?
Smith.
Any clue on that?
So, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, I think the missing link is, we know nationally only 1% of families request exemptions. We know that our close partners here in the region, the other two large housing authorities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, have very few exceptions. And the other thing is, it depends on type of exemption, because if it's a temporary exemption, families have to pay that back. So that, so it's really only the long-term exemptions that would impact but the 162,000. And the other thing that I'll mention is, we know that our families that are on zero income, that's not sustainable. Families cannot live at zero income for long periods of time. And we see that in our operation with our income changes, with our case managers, that That's not sustainable, so in most cases, those are probably temporary situations.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Would you say, thanks, Mr. Chair, so, but for this minimum rent change, 18 families, their subsidy would be in jeopardy. Is that an accurate statement to say, or is that overstating it?
Ms. Smith.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, my goal in telling you that is to try and give you a picture of what $160,000 can do for the Housing Authority. We know we have the $1 million deficit. We know that today, if implemented today, and nobody's income, all the program participants stayed constant, nobody's income ever changed, that deficit would reduce by $162,000. And what I'm saying is $162,000 is enough to provide rent subsidy based on today's rents for 18 families for 12 months.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to recognize Councilmembers Lee and Atlas Ingovitz and then move us to a motion, again, respecting Councilmember Chambliss' interest in proposing a different minimum rent. So, Councilmember Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I grew up very poor in Fresno County, California, and people who are in low-income housing or public housing, they're not there because they want to be, if they could help themselves. I'm inclined to vote for this mainly because, and we can go into the weeds with numbers, but because of the environment that we're in, with the attitude of the federal administration, as an HRA, we've already been kind of hung out to dry, and we risk living under 4 more years of the current federal administration. And if we can incentivize more folks to take our vouchers, that's what I'm doing this for. And I have no qualms if we end business with landlords who don't keep up their properties. I used to take constituent comments and calls from Mayor Coleman, and we'd get horrible complaints about slumlords. And if so, for me, it's about the people and the people who need this the most. And I want the staff to really consider everything that's been said before. And but I appreciate the way that you have rolled out all of these scenarios for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Just one question. Is the minimum rent required for getting the moving to work status?
Ms. Smith.
Chair Lilligren and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, no.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Councilmember Mousse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like we don't have consensus to move this item forward. Since you said that we can move it without approving it, is that a possibility? I think that.
So I don't know. I would propose now to move into taking a motion, move the entire item as was proposed from staff, then recognizing Councilmember Chambliss to make it would really be directing staff, a staff direction to change the minimum rent to $25. Then we can debate that and vote on that as well. But I think we need to move to a vote. Is that what you want?
I would love to move the staff recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
I would like to move that,
Staff direction to reduce the minimum.
staff direction to reduce the minimum to $25 with the difference being made up in those that are paying for page 13, where the proposed minimum rent has a net 13. So that would mean that the TTP would be higher than the $50.
Is that clear, Ms. Smith?
Chair Lilligren, Councilmember Chambliss, I'm not sure that we can only establish a minimum rent for certain subsets of our voucher holders. I think as a policy, we need to either adopt a minimum rent or not. I don't think we have the discretion or the authority to only do it for certain
Okay, I'm used
program
to doing
participants.
spreadsheet manipulations and things like
Sure,
that.
we're not that
I
fancy
apologize.
here.
Okay, then I would like to make a motion for the minimum rent to be $25.
So, Councilmember Chambliss has made a motion to direct staff to reduce the minimum rent to $25, essentially an amendment to the main motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on that? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be opposed to that because you're going to lose a bunch of the money, which means that we're looking at families that aren't going to get vouchers again, because we can't make it up somewhere else because of the federal rules. I mean, if it was a perfect world, we could just say, hey, everybody pay 33% and of your income and the thing magically goes away, but we don't get to do that. And by changing it to 25, we're going to be having families that we can't cover the cost because there are very, very limited options on making up this money. I've been through this with Ms. Smith many, many times, and it's not just under the current federal administration. This has been going on the whole time I've been here, where we have these decisions that we have to make, and staff works really, really hard to come up with ways that maximize how many vouchers we can have and minimize the hurtful impacts on the residents. And I'm comfortable with the exemption opportunities for the people who have a hardship, and comfortable with that because the rest of the region has been doing minimum rents for the most part. There's a couple outliers that don't, but for the most part, doing $50 a month in the region is normal. So I think it's okay for us to do what the rest of the region has done and maximize how many people we are going to serve.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the Chambliss amendment? Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. I also don't support the amendment, but I don't know if it would be in the form of making an additional amendment. Don't support having the minimum rent as a part of the plan. I want to just make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. I appreciate the effort to illustrate the value of the $162,000, but unless we get $162,000 plus the $1.84 million, we're not going to have an impact on any additional families.
Mr.
Ms.
Chair
Smith.
and Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen, I would interpret that differently. I would say we have $1.9 million deficit if we make up 162,000 with this deficit. So say at, and these are all hypothetical because it's based on who we're serving today and what rents are today. But if we have a $1.9 million deficit, we have to either reduce the program size by 200 or figure out something else. If we reduce that by $162,000, then it maybe becomes we can serve 182 families less instead of 200 less. So it makes a difference of service to 18 families is what I'm saying, is what $162,000 will serve.
Chair, it makes a difference, but we're not providing new housing to 18 families, which I feel like I just want to be clear about that.
Ms. Smith.
Councilmember Lindgren and Chair Atlas Ingebrigtsen, we don't get new vouchers, but it allows us to serve 18 additional families, I would say.
Thank you.
That we may not otherwise be able to serve unless we use some of those other options.
Councilmember?
I'll just share because I'm thinking I'm probably in the minority in this. For me, it's a matter of principle. In a nation where we have prosperity that is up, our philanthropy and our resources going to people is down. And that's the first time that that's happened in our nation in a very long time, or ever, I'm not sure, but it's been a long time. It's made several stories in Chronicle Philanthropy. Forbes did an article on this too. So for me, as a matter of just principle, for those who have the least among us to not have a significant impact, in my humble opinion, given that 1.9, I apologize, I was incorrect saying $1.4 million deficit, which I know is a gap, I know is needed. I just think I want another solution. So that's just where I'm at on it.
Thank you, Councilmember. And I'm going to call for the vote in a moment, but I am, with all due respect to Councilmember Chambliss, going to vote against the amendment, and I plan to support the staff recommendation as it came forward, in part because many of us were concerned that a $50 minimum rent really wasn't taking much of a bite out of our shortfall, out of our deficit. Now we'd be cutting that in half. I'm confident that the exemptions that can be made can reduce the hardship on those most in need. And also to Councilmember Wolf's point, all but 2 of the HRAs currently have minimum rents in our region. This would move us to all but 1 of the HRAs in our region. And it really weighs heavily on me that HUD recommended a minimum rent. As we continue to be creative about how to provide housing to everyone within our region, I think listening to the federal agency that provides so much through the voucher program, I think is important. So with that, all those in favor of the Chambliss amendment to reduce the minimum rent to $25, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. No.
No.
I'm guessing that prevail. That do I show of hands?
Peter was a no or a yes?
I voted no.
And I was no.
No. Voted no.
No. What's that?
Motion's not carried.
Okay, so that fails. So now the main motion is before us, which was the staff recommendation as, or the staff action as proposed.
Clarification. So we're voting in yes or no for her motion, right?
Correct. We voted no on directing staff to reduce the minimum rent to $25.
Okay.
Okay. So now the main motion is before us. Is there discussion? Councilmember Chambliss.
I really appreciate all the time and the comments. This is a really tough decision that we have to make, and even with this decision, we're still not, at parity. I just really sometimes think that, there's a tendency to go with, status quo or, this is what other people are doing. That's understandable, always keeping in mind that these are families that we are talking about, and we always talk about people first. So given that and thinking about the fact that, there are ways that the renters can ask for a hardship and that they can also ask for an extension. I hope that since we know that people are not asking for that extension, again, just making sure that people understand what their options are and putting in some of that additional effort to letting folks know that if you do have a hardship, that that council cares.
Chair, I would like to make one clarification. I support her that the motion, so get confused. I support her on her on the vote count. I would like to go on the record supporting her.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none. Oh, Councilmember Atlas-Ingebrigtsen.
I'll move an amendment to remove the minimum rent altogether.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on that?
I think I shared my reasons why.
I'll move towards the vote. Those in support of that, Councilmember
Discussion.
Yep, discussion.
I understand the principle of not having a minimum rent. And my purpose for the motion was to alleviate that somewhat by my $25 minimum rent. So I certainly understand Councilmember Atlas's amendment, but I also understand what is before us, and that is if we do not take this action, less people will be served with the vouchers. So I would reluctantly have to approve the proposed $50 minimum rent that was proposed by the staff.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the Atlas-Ingebrigtsen amendment? Seeing none, all in approval of eliminating the minimum rent requirement, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, please say no.
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 That does not carry. Thank you. So back to the main motion before us, the proposed action with the changes as recommended or proposed by staff. Further discussion? Seeing none, but before we vote, I just want to say thanks for this conversation. This has not been easy. We have been very thoughtful and I think compassionate, and we are in positions where we have to make difficult decisions, and this is one of them that could hurt people's lives. But I really appreciate the spirit that all of my colleagues here have entered into this conversation. So, all in approval of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. That carries. This will not be on the consent agenda, so we'll have an opportunity to discuss it. Thank you, Ms. Smith, Ms. Kehoe. Thank you, my colleagues. Thanks, Michelle. And to the staff that waited around, my apologies. I did not know that was going to take quite so long, but Chair Slawick did want to be here for the presentation, did want to hear as much of the conversation as she could. So we will move on to business item 9. It's the Rush Creek Regional Trail Acquisition Master Plan Amendment and Facility Exchange. Ms. Kinney, thank you.
Chair Lilligren, council members, good afternoon. My name is Tracy Kinney. I'm the planner in regional parks, and today before you is the Rush Creek Regional Trail Master Plan Amendment and Facility Exchange on behalf of Three Rivers Park District. Rush Creek Regional Trail is located in the northwest portion of the regional park system and also the northwest portion of Three Rivers Park District and Hennepin County, as shown in the left-hand side image. And the right-hand side image is the project location and also the trail. When complete, the trail is it's an 18-mile trail that will connect the Mississippi Gateway Regional Park, the Elm Creek Park Reserve, and then on to the west, Crow Hassan Park Reserve. The regional trail has a council-approved master plan as of 2008, and the request before you is located in the city of Brooklyn Park, which is highlighted in the right-hand image. And these two images are figures 1 and 3 in your business item. Today's request is prompted by a transportation improvement project that is shown in MnDOT policy, Metropolitan Council's transportation policy plan, and Brooklyn Park's draft transportation section of their comprehensive plan. The project is located at the intersection of Trunk Highway 169 and 101st Avenue. The intersection is currently an at-grade intersection with no traffic signals. It is anticipated that future development of the northwest area of Brooklyn Park will increase dramatically, and additional access will be needed to facilitate the end station of the Metro Transit Blue Line extension. These two areas are highlighted in the hatched blue. Improving this intersection, which is included in the dark, the black line, includes converting 101st Avenue, which is the east-west road, to a 4-lane bridge and adding on and off ramps to Trunk Highway 169. To accomplish this, the Three Rivers Park District is requesting to remove 2.3 acres of trail corridor land, which is circled in red there, in exchange for a $30,000 credit towards a new grade-separated crossing of the Rush Creek Regional Trail at Winnetka Avenue, and this is starred over to the right. The trail crossing at Winnetka Avenue is at grade and also anticipated to be affected by this future development. Investing in a new grade-separated crossing will increase the safety of the trail, thereby increasing the recreational benefit to the users. The image before you is figure 4 in your business item. The part of the Rush Creek Regional Trail that is impacted by the transportation project is shown in red. It's 2.3 acres, and this land consists primarily of grassland, woodland, and wetland. The land currently serves as a stormwater basin for the Trunk Highway 169, 101 intersection, and will continue to maintain similar drainage patterns. The request will not impact the trail, the alignment, or a natural path that is on this property. This is figure 4 in your business item. Staff finds that the proposed facility exchange is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan and other council policies, specifically System Protection Strategy 2 conversions, Chapter 4, siting and acquisition. The proposed actions before you are to approve the Rush Creek Recreational Trail Master Plan Amendment, approve the release of the restrictive covenant on the 2.3 acres of land within the Rush Creek Recreational Trail needed for the trunk 169-101 Avenue North interchange in exchange for the investment of $30,000, the appraised value of the property toward the development of the Rush Creek Regional Trail, grade separated crossing at Winnetka Avenue, and inform Three Rivers Park District that $30,000 towards the development of the Rush Creek Regional Trail, grade separated crossing at Winnetka Avenue is not grant eligible expenses, and to inform Three Rivers Park District to coordinate with Metropolitan Council Environmental Services on the location and construction of the proposed roadway that is on or near Metropolitan Council property prior to initiating this request. And on September 5th, the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission approved this request unanimously. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kinney. Thank you very much. Questions on that report, Councilmember Bento?
I have a question. I'd like to move approval, and I'd like to just express awe for the speed with which Ms. Kinney presented. That was phenomenal.
Right.
As someone who's been clocked at 800 words per minute, it's really good. So.
Good job. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Chambliss.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I am really happy about the developments and improvement along 169 and 101. It's an area that I travel regularly, and I've often wanted that area to be improved. So I'm just so happy to see that we're getting there finally.
You have further discussion on the motion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just comment that a lot of times we try to have an exchange of land, but this time losing a little sliver next to a major freeway in exchange for a bridge is a good deal.
Good deal. Agree. Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Ms. Kinney. And you're here for item 10, the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve Acquisition Master Plan and Boundary Adjustment.
I certainly am here. Once again, my name is Tracy Kinney, and we also have in our audience, thankfully, Patty Freeman and Alyssa Delgado is here from Scott County. We thank them for being here for this.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your patience. My apologies. Thank you so much.
So Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve Acquisition Master Plan Amendment and Boundary Change on behalf of Scott County. Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve is located in the southwest portion of the regional park system, as shown on the left-hand side, and also in the southwest portion of Scott County, as shown in the right-hand image with the star. This project, this park reserve is located along the Minnesota River in Blakely Township of Scott County. This is figures 1 and 2 in your business item. This is a planned park reserve and it is east of the Minnesota River and the Minnesota Valley State Recreation Area and north of the Department of Natural Resources Nye Wildlife Management Area, as well as it serves as a hub for 2 regional trails. The planned park reserve is in an acquisition and stewardship phase and is currently not open to the public. The park reserve has a 2012 original acquisition master plan and a 2015 acquisition master plan amendment. Scott County intends to prepare a development master plan for Blakely Bluffs in 6 to 8 years. Scott County is requesting to add 7 acres and remove 145 acres from the master plan boundary, reducing the total acreage from 2,545 acres to 2,407 acres. The additional 7 acres is shown in orange, is part of a 38-acre property that is already within the current boundary, but was unintentionally omitted. This 38-acre property, really 31-acre, this whole 38-acre property will come before you immediately after this request for a Parks Acquisition Opportunity Fund consideration. The property to be removed, which is shown in green, this larger property was purchased by the Department of Natural Resources, and it's 121 acres. This is directly north of the Nye Wildlife Area. The remaining two properties are shown in yellow, and they're 10 acres and 14 acres, and both of them have structures on them, and they're no longer of interest to Scott County. 7 acres to be added to the master plan boundary has high natural resources and recreational value. The property consists mainly of floodplain forest habitats, and it's directly adjacent to the Minnesota River Valley. This parcel will provide a critical link to the future hiking trail, as well as provide flexible space for signage and birding. The property is also subject to a conservation easement held by the Minnesota Land Trust. This is fairly typical. The easement ensures the property of the easement ensures the protection of the natural, scenic, and open space qualities of significant importance. The easement allows for minor improvements and trail development. This is Figure 5 in your business item. The staff finds that the proposed acquisition master plan amendment and boundary adjustment is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan and other council policies, specifically Planning Strategy 1 and Chapter 4, Siting and Acquisition. And the proposed actions before you are to approve Scott County's Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve acquisition master plan amendment, and then also to approve the boundary adjustment, adding the 7 acres of high-quality natural resource land along the Minnesota River in Blakely Township, and to inform Scott County that it must submit the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve Development Master Plan for Metropolitan Council approval prior to requesting funding for development. And this request was also approved unanimously on September 5th by the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kenny. Questions for Ms. Kenny? Any questions? Councilmember Wolf, would you like to move this?
I would.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on Councilmember Wolf's motion? Discussion. Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you so much. And now our final business item for tonight is the adjustment to, wait one second, Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve. You're not Miss Jessica. Okay, thank you. Number 11. Jessica, thank you.
Thank you, Chair and members. For the record, my name is Jessica Lee, and I'm here to present Business Item 2019-229, Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Grant for Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, the O'Reilly property in Scott County. You've already seen this map, but once again, Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, and this is the southwest corner of Scott County along the Minnesota River. If you zoom in here on the left, you have the Scott County Park System. On the right is the proposed boundary for Blakely Bluffs, and the shaded parcel in blue is the O'Reilly property. Here we zoom in and we can see some of the natural resources on the O'Reilly property. This is a 37.45 acre property that contains 12 acres of the native plant community red oak, sugar maple, basswood forest, and 7 acres of Minnesota River Valley floodplain, including willow swamp and silver maple floodplain forest. Our proposals, our rationale for recommendation is consistent with the 2040 Regional Parks Policy Plan, State Fiscal Year 2019 Parks and Trails Legacy Fund appropriation requirements, the Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve Acquisition Master Plan as amended with concurrent business item 2019-228, and Scott County is within its $1.7 million per year limit for Parks and Trails Legacy Fund, PAOF funding. This slide shows the O'Reilly acquisition total project cost of $740,351. The appraised value of this property was $695,000, and the seller has agreed to $649,900, providing a land donation. And the chart on the bottom shows the grant structure. So the total grant amount would be $555,000 with a local match of $185,000. And with that, our recommendations today are to approve a grant of up to $555,263.25 to Scott County to acquire the 37.45 acre O'Reilly property located at 25975 Chatfield Drive in the city of Belle Plaine for Blakely Bluffs Park Reserve, to authorize the Community Development Director to execute the grant agreement and restrictive covenant on behalf of the council, to consider reimbursing Scott County up to $185,087.75 from its share of a future regional parks capital bonding program, and to inform Scott County that the council does not under any circumstance represent or guarantee that the council will grant future reimbursement, and that the expenditure of local funds never entitles the park agency to reimbursement. With that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and my apologies on the name mix-up. I think I'm just getting a little cross-eyed at this hour. So, questions on that, Councilmember Lee?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question and a comment. My comment is that people with the last name Lee are the coolest. My question is, like, we have so many of these cool projects that that come through us, and how do we tell the communities about these improvements that we do to the parks and lands, and make sure that the community knows so they can go out and use these awesome places that are constantly coming before us? I think it'd be a great way to get some free media and just genuine community involvement.
Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Chair, members. I do believe that most agencies are pretty good at publicizing these acquisitions when they happen. I've seen a lot of them in the news. And there's a lot of public engagement around the master plans for these properties as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? I'd recognize Councilmember Wolf for a motion.
Well, if I could make the base staff motions, we can get that on the table first. But when I was reading the agenda item this morning, I realized from my 10 years of experience as the liaison to the Parks and Open Space Commission that they missed something. The Regional Parks System Fund distribution policy says that if an agency gets the landowner to accept a lower price and donate part of the land, so they're not asking for the 100% of the appraised value, that donation counts towards the local match for the agency. Because we want landowners to give donations to the system that helps all of us. So I contacted staff this morning because this was a really long agenda and I didn't get to actually reading this agenda item till this morning, and they scrambled all day today and wrote up an amendment for me. So what it would do is take that $45,100 land donation and apply that towards the community's match amount, and then that increases the amount that the council pays and decreases the amount that the agency would have to have as their local match. So what we need to do is amend the number one grant up to $555,263.25 would be $600,363.25 for the grant, and then in item number 3, it would be $139,987.75 would be Scott County's match that they would have to come up with in cash. So
Great. First off, great eye, Councilmember Wolf, to catch this, and thank you for doing that. And I'd be prepared to just accept
that as the motion?
As the main motion.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, then we'll do that.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, good job. I mean, good catch. So any discussion on the motion and Councilmember Wolf's motion? Discussion.
I would just offer that it is worth Ms. Freeman's patience to sit here till the end of the meeting because they just made $45,000.
You earned it. You earned it. Seeing no further discussion on Councilmember Wolf's motion, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. And thank you for our guests from Scott County. Thank you for sitting through that. And seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.